gonna, let's see. We're live. Hey, I think we're live. What's up? My first sober live stream. Hey, can anyone hear me? I don't see my messages. Maybe here. Da, da, da. Oh, you can hear me. We're live. Woohoo! Yes, Nemeton is here. Riva. So good to have you here, bro. Let me just figure out what is happening with this chat here. Okay, I don't see the chat here, but let me maybe switch to the other screen. Okay, y'all hear me? And you see me all right? Okay. So, hey Valerie, hey Jason, hey Charley, and Lord Roku and YS Brandt. Thank you guys for joining us for the live stream. This is so cool. So we're doing a live stream here to celebrate having 5,000 subscribers, which is so crazy. It's like a really crazy big number. It's like really hard to imagine what 5,000 people all in one little space are, particularly during Corona, but it's really great to have all you people here with us, joining us for this journey. I have no idea where it's heading or where it's going, but my intuition is that it's heading somewhere cool and fun and hopeful. So really great to have all of you here with us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the questions, and then if people have questions along the way and or want to butt in, they are more than welcome to, and I will be monitoring the live chat. Hey, Francis. Thank you so much for taking your time to come in and say that you appreciate what we're doing here. We appreciate you. Thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to say that doing a Q&A is kind of funny and presumptuous because it assumes that I have answers to your questions, which I really don't. I don't have any answers. I have maybe like questions to add to the conversation. But I think maybe like together, if we think about these things, we can maybe come to some new ways of thinking about old problems that might be helpful. So I promised to answer the questions that were posted to the video that we posted 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when we announced the Q&A. And I said that I would just do it by order of however many thumbs up those questions got, which I assume represents to some degree what the public want to hear about. Should I try this light? Okay. Okay. Yes. Hey, Justin. It's been so nice to have you here as well on the channel, as part of the community and commenting and sharing your beautiful reflections and meditations and poetry. So thank you so much for joining us as well here. Let us crack then. Hey, from Chile. Let's crack then into the first question. I haven't checked back recently to see how the upvotes were doing. So this is as of yesterday or something. We're so glad to have you here, Justin. Thank you. 1 second. Oh, right. So it looks like the most requested question was from, thank you, Alyssa. It looks like the most requested question was from Mo Parnas. Thank you, Mo, for the question. I think Alyssa's actually talking about this nice patch that I ironed on just today, and it's staying on nice and fresh. We sent out a patch like this to all the patrons. They're going to be getting one in the mail, and all of you that want to order one, you can order one too. To do a little plug here before we get started, Mo Parnas said, "Would love to know how you started / became interested in these subjects and your path." And this had something like 8 or 9 upvotes. So how did I start and get interested in this subject being mysticism, philosophy, I take it to mean, and my own path? It's a really great question. I generally, hey Peter, thank you for joining us. How are you? So I generally don't talk about myself that much on the channel, on the project, which you may notice if you've been following, simply because I don't think the project is about me. It's about larger things. It's about mysticism and unity and love and God. So I try to avoid that. But I have spoken about it when people on other podcasts and channels like have me on to their channels and ask me to like introduce my story. So I have nothing to hide. I am Jewish. Actually, funnily enough, I just got a question added to the questions here if I'm Jewish. I am Jewish. I grew up in a Hasidic community. For those that don't know what the Hasidic community is, it is a modern branch of Orthodox Jewry. The Hasidic movement started about 200 years ago with Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem, and we will get into that because that is a mystical movement, and part of our job description here at the channel is to cover the history and philosophy of mystical movements. We actually have an upcoming series soon on Jewish pantheism and panentheism. And how best to self-narrativize this journey? I was studying Jewish mysticism, contemporary Jewish mysticism, Hasidic mysticism from the age of 13. Is when males in the Hasidic community begin a formal introduction to Hasidic mysticism for a bar mitzvah. And then a few years later, the study became more serious, but I never really understood what was going on. It all seemed kind of like celestial plumbing, in that you learn how like one level connects to another level and like everything sort of works together in the upper spheres and heavens, but you don't actually learn, at least in my experience, I didn't get to learn what these terms actually mean for me in my own experience. And what happened was I discovered through a very strange roundabout way, through a novel that I was reading, I discovered that there was mysticisms outside of Jewish mysticism, which to me was also like quite a shock at the time. I was still young. I was still like 16, 17. And I discovered first Christian mysticism, then Eastern mysticism, and then Sufi Islamic mysticism, I think in that order. And I started to see a tremendous amount of commonality between those traditions just from reading on my own. I wasn't reading anything comparative or philosophical, just looking at the primary text or secondary text of each tradition. And what happened was when I began to take some of those maps and registers from other traditions and bring them back to bear on my own tradition and sort of overlay them on the concepts which I had been having trouble with in Jewish mysticism, it began to open up my own tradition to me in a way that it could make sense and could begin to understand in a way that was personal and meaningful and existential, in a sense that actually brought meaning to me. So that's in short how I got started, and I'm happy to get more into details about how exactly that journey went, and where I was at the time, and what it did for me, and all those kinds of things. But that's a general sketch and overview. If anyone has any like more specific questions, I'm happy to get more into that. But maybe we should move on because we have a whole lot of questions to get to. What I think what's really interesting was this idea, was the ability to take the maps of other traditions and overlay them on top of my own maps. And kind of the metaphor that I've come up with is that if you have a set of transparent maps, that each one has their own markings, but they're not really complete. When you begin to lay them one on top of the other, you can begin to see how a full picture emerges. And sometimes when other traditions have different language and metaphors and poetry and philosophy, when you begin to create like a kaleidoscopic image together with all of them, you begin to get a really, really complete picture, as far as one can get something that's complete in mysticism. So Ali says, "Hey yo, just found you through Justin Esoterica. You have great content." Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much for joining us. And Justin at Esoterica is making amazing work, and we've had the great privilege to collaborate with him and to learn from him. We've done some work on logic and mysticism together, and another great channel which we've been working with is Philip Home from Let's Talk Religion, who we've also had a chance to actually twice now to collaborate with, and they're both producing amazing content with Christianity. I found that learning about other traditions developed my connection with Christianity. So thank you, Justin, for sharing your journey with us. I think that's I think it's a common theme, and I think it's a beautiful thing happening today, where we're able to explore other people's traditions in a way that actually beautifies and deepens and strengthens our own engagement with our tradition, and not in a way that undermines or yeah. So I think that's a very cool opportunity that we have today. Yes, Charley, Wired for Sound, big ups to Esoterica, 100%. We're huge fans of Esoterica. And I'm actually looking forward to meeting up with Justin in the flesh sometime soon when we are in the same country, God willing, soon. Okay, let's move on to the next question then, shall we? And please feel free at any time to add questions to the list. And even if I can't get to them at the moment, I'll actually add them to the list and we'll get to them as we go along. So Joe Jones says, and this question had, I think, 6 upvotes. If you were to meet a god or God, so a god or God, what question would you ask to understand its nature? So this is like a bit of a variation on the generic question of like, what question would you ask God if you could chat to God? The question here is, what question would you ask God to get some understanding of God's nature? I think it's an interesting question. Hey, Leia. That's funny. I told Leia that family's not allowed to be here, but I think Leia is a friend as much as she is family. So thank you for joining here, Leia. It's really sweet of you, but I'm blushing now. What question would one ask to understand God's nature? I think also this is like a very big question. So if anyone here in the chat has a question which they would ask God to understand God's nature, what would it be? I think like the most obvious answer would be like, just you would ask God, like, tell me your nature, or something like that. And I was thinking about this question because it's an interesting question. Hey, Yitz. In the Bible, in the good book, I was thinking of 2 episodes where there's an individual who wants to get a sense of what the nature of God is. It's the same person. It's Moses, and Moses at the burning bush, the first time that he encounters God and gets sent on his mission to take the Jews out of Egypt, or the Israelites out of Egypt, he asks God to tell him his name, which is very, like, in today's day and age, a name is kind of an easy thing, but for the ancients, knowing the name of something really meant knowing its essence. And particularly with God, the name of God or a God is very much connected with its essence. And you see this in many, in lots of Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, where in order to conquer something or to get to know something or to love something, there's a prerequisite to know its name. And knowing its name is a very, very powerful thing in many mystical and esoteric traditions. And so at the burning bush, Moses asks God, "What's your name?" And God famously answers, "Eya," later. That God says, it's a bit hard to translate, but I am, or I shall be what I shall be. That's an interesting moment. Justin says names are spells. Yeah, 100%. Names also evoke the essence of something from it. But later Moses asks God a different question. So that's in Exodus chapter 3 at the burning bush. In Exodus 30 chapters later, in Exodus 33, Moses, when he's on kind of a good roll with God after he just got forgiveness for the golden calf, he asks God, Hareini, twice actually. First he says, Hareini noas darkecha, and then he says, Hareini noas kvedecha, a few verses later. Verse 13 and verse 18. Hareini noas kvedecha, which is the more well-remembered one, where he asks God to show God his glory. And without getting too technical into biblical scholarship and what the word kavod, or glory, means, according to different, biblical exegetes, this transition from Moses saying, "Tell me your name," which is the beginning of their relationship, which is a very profound moment, and then he says, "Show me your glory." And I think maybe that question from Moses is the question which is the question which is the one to get God to reveal God's nature. And for all of you that know the biblical narrative, which I'm guessing most of you do, God says, like, one cannot see my face and live, but if you hide in the cleft of the rock, you can see me from behind. And that's a very beautiful idea. And in some sense, the mystics, when they speak about the nature of God, is something that we cannot know. It's fundamentally transcendent, and we see a lot of that in particularly in apophatic and in negative theology. But in the other sense, because God is all, and because God in some sense is our true essence as well, to know oneself, which is the maxim over the door of Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, is to know God. So that's an interesting thing to ponder on. I don't know if I gave a good question. I don't know if I gave a good answer to that good question. If anyone here in the chat has a good response, I would love to hear. And before I move on to the next question, I'm going to see what's happening here in the chat. So, hey, Daniel Vastrub, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Zevi. Love your programs. Any plans to teach on mysticism of Abraham Maimonides? So, we have done a series on Jewish mysticism and Sufism. And over there, we spoke briefly about Abraham Maimonides because he's a key figure in that history of that relationship between those two Abrahamic mysticisms. It wasn't like an in-depth analysis, and I could definitely come back to do a video on Abraham Maimonides. More requested was to speak about the mysticism of his father, Moses Maimonides. Very contentious. I mean, probably the most significant Jewish philosopher of all ages. Jewish philosophy is split into two periods, pre-Maimonides and post-Maimonides. And the question of Maimonides' relationship to Kabbalah and mysticism in general, to Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism, is a very contentious question, which I do want to have a stab at. And maybe after we cover his father, we'll get down to his son, Abraham Maimonides, who was real close buddies with the Sufis of his day in Cairo. Daniel says, also, why character changing his or her name is so significant? Yeah, well, if a name represents the essence of something, if it's not just happenstance, but if a name is essential, then to change your name means to change your essence in some sense, which is why in the Jewish tradition, if someone is sick, we typically add a name to them that implies health or life. So that is definitely something very significant. One second. Okay. Emmanuel Rosen says, do you have any tips for finding a Kabbalah mentor? I'm going to Israel in about a year. Is there anyone in South Jerusalem who I could learn from for a while there? Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of people to learn Kabbalah with and from in Israel and in Jerusalem and Tzfat. In many ways, it would be the center of such a thing. It really depends on whether you want to study academically or traditionally, religiously, and depends on where you are in your own learning. If you need a beginner's level, if you need something more advanced, feel free to drop me an email or a DM or whatever it is, and tell me where you're at, and I can think of who I can pair you up with. Jason Johnson says shalom. Hey Jason, what up? Connor Campbell says, hi Zevi, I'm very pleased to see your channel growing so quickly. Thank you. Do you have thoughts on how to leverage the collective action of this community to manifest a better world? Wow, Connor, that is literally the $1 million question. How to leverage the collective action of this community to manifest a better world. That, like, I couldn't have put that question better myself, Connor. Thank you so much for posing that question. It's a question which I'm thinking about all the time. Like, firstly, how to build community in this day and age with being technologically mediated as we are. It's a very strange thing and new things for humans, and it's only been really put on steroids by Corona. I'll tell you my own thinking in this regard, and because it's a community and it's not a dictatorship, I would love to hear from you, Connor, and from everyone else here, how we can leverage the collective action of this community to manifest a better world. Well said. I actually want to save that line right now, so I have it for later after this thing disappears. I think there are many ways to change the world for the better, and I am an optimist. I do believe that we can create a better world if we so desire. I think that we have the power to do it, and I think that a lot of the cynical, pessimistic thought that sort of the power is out of our hands and we're being ruled by overlords and we can't do anything about it. I think that's very detrimental thinking, and I don't engage in that thinking at all. I'm an optimist, and I think that we the people can create a better world for ourselves because it's our world, and it begins definitely with ourselves. We have to be better people. We have to be kinder people, kinder first to ourselves and then to those around us, and that circle has to expand concentrically outwards in that order, from the center outwards. I think people that are very kind to strangers and foreigners, but to their own family, I think there's something fundamentally wrong there. I think it has to begin with ourselves. I mean, this is the cliche of all cliches, but what become the change you want to see was that Gandhi's line, which is so true. I think that what I was saying was that there are many ways to change the world. I think direct action is a real way to change the world. I think showing kindness and love to people who, for whatever reason, politicians or the media tell us that we're supposed to hate or be afraid of or be scared to. I think those are narratives that are there to keep us ensnarled and enchained in our own vices of separation and loneliness, to just keep us scared. And I think that if we break down those narratives of who we're supposed to be hating and who we're supposed to be loving, and love indiscriminately across boundaries, across borders, I think that's the most powerful thing that we can do. And I think that has to be grounded in real action, which means that it has to be about encountering the people who are seen as others and enemies and strangers, and really engaging with them in a deep, human, loving way. And I think that fundamentally it has to be based in a real belief, and that's really what I'm working here on the channel, is to set up the belief system to allow such a world to flourish, or to participate in that process, where the belief that the mystics have, which I think is a thoroughly compelling, convincing, empirical, scientific belief that we are fundamentally one, fundamentally unified and interdependent, leads to a metaphysic which demands a love for each other. I'm actually participating in a panel tomorrow, exact issue of ethics and mysticism, and I'd like to, if they'll let me, I'll record it and upload it to the channel, where I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of this question. I think that we very much live our lives through the constructs of the metaphysical narratives that we possess, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I think that the metaphysical narrative that we possess today, by and large, is one which is very othering, and one which separates us from the world around us, from each other. And I think that there is an alternative narrative, an alternative theology, mythology, scientific worldview, which is about a deeply unitive worldview, and one which is experiential and tangible, and which creates love in its wake by necessity. So I think that in this community, I think the very fact that we're coming together to share our respective backgrounds or traditions. I come from one very specific, particularistic background. I come from a Hasidic, Jewish, Australian family, and I love my particularism. I love the fact that I'm Australian. I love that I'm Jewish. I love that I'm Hasidic, and I'm not looking to lay away any of that. And then we have people. I had a message today from someone who's from their Malaysian Shia Sufi, and they're coming with their own identity and complexity. And they said that the channel had been helping them through their Ramadan meditations, and they came and shared their own thoughts. And I think that everyone coming to the channel with their own backgrounds and being able to explore and share the common narrative and common metaphor that we as humans have individually cultivated for so many thousands of years, to be able to come out and share that shared mystical narrative and show it to be not just beautiful and not just good and inspiring, but also to have real compelling truth value propositions to it. I think that's at least how I would like to change. What was the phrase used? To manifest a better world. The one-line pitch that I put on the Patreon, not to plug the Patreon at a moment like this, but was that the project here is to change minds to create a better world. And I really do think that that's a very big part of it. And I don't think philosophy is the only way to change the world. I think that art is one way to change the world, and music, and I think there are so many ways. But that's at least the way we're going about it here. So if you have your own tradition to share, and you have your own vision for reality that fits in as a piece to that puzzle, please come here and share it. And that is what Seekers of Unity is about. Thank you so much for that wonderful question. Let's look back to the chat and see what is going on here. Lord Roku. Zevi, I would like to ask you a question, but it's kind of long. Is there any way to contact you via email or something else you have? Yeah. Drop me an email at seekersofu, the letter U. I think sharing information expands consciousness is a great step. Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I think that there's kind of like a tipping point in consciousness, and as there's a tipping point in anything, and the more people that come to a unitive awareness and consciousness, the more that has power to affect the world at large. I agree. Valerie lives in Hawaii, Pono. Respect and honor yourself, others, or creatures, Mother Earth, by thoughts, words, actions. Thank you, Valerie. Yes, that's essentially the crux of the issue. The punchline: to respect, honor ourselves and others, all creatures, Mother Earth, thoughts, words, and actions. I would just add to that is to see them not as others, but to see them as fundamentally ourselves. What do I think of Plotinus? I absolutely love Plotinus. I think Plotinus is the father of philosophical mysticism in the West in many senses. And I'm a huge fan of Neoplatonism. And maybe I can get more into specifics after we finish the questions we had already. David Brackman says, Kol hakavod, Zevi, you're encouraged to be prepared to teach universal message of unity and love and so inspire. Thank you, David. I'm really touched and inspired by you guys that have joined me for this journey to help share and teach and think about a universal message of love and unity in a way that I think is not naive, but a way that's thoughtful and self-critical. So thank you. You inspire me, I think, as much as I inspire you, and I don't say that as a cliche. Hi, Sheva. Thank you for joining us. How's the gardening today? You did a very wonderful job, I saw from the pictures. Jason says, beautiful. How will we connect if we keep pushing each other away? Absolutely. It's time to start embracing instead of pushing away. Let us get back to the question list, and please continue to interact in the live chat. I'm going to continue to do both. Question number 4, I think it is. Andrew says, do I have any daily spiritual / contemplative practices? Another personal question. I've gone through like my own long religious / spiritual story and journey, and with changing forms of practice. What I do now, so I really don't want to set myself up as some kind of model for what good spiritual practice. Like I think there are far better people to learn from. What I do for myself is most recently, just to share and be honest, because why not? So part of the Orthodox Jewish tradition, in a tradition that goes all the way back to the Bible. In fact, there was the tradition of tefillin. There were tefillin that were found in the with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves, and seeing those here in the Israel Museum absolutely blew my mind. It's just very like anchored to something physical and historical in a really concrete way. I've had like a difficult relationship with tefillin. Maybe for another time I'll get into that. But what I do now is my spiritual practice consists of a silent meditation in the morning, a short one while wearing my tefillin, trying to both connect with myself, with the silence and with the small voice that we sometimes hear in the silence, and trying to connect to it through my tradition, through Judaism, through the tefillin that I wear. That's one thing. The other thing is I try, and I think a lot of my spiritual practice is connected to books, as nerdy as that sounds, but I try and go to sleep reading, and first thing in the morning not look at my phone, but instead continue from where I left off reading. That's the literal bookends to my day. And that for me is a spiritual practice, and the books that I'm reading always try to better my understanding of unity and of mysticism and of what we're studying here and exploring together. The other spiritual practice which I can recommend, which works directly to undermine the false sense of self that we have, is to just do kind things for someone else, even at the very slight expense of yourself, because it kind of reinforces a narrative which is really better for ourselves, that we're actually not fundamentally separate and other, but we're here as one, or as many manifestations of the one, which is the only thing that is. So yeah, I try to do this in ways that, like, it feels weird to say this out loud, because it's not about doing it to be noticed or about, because that's self-defeating, but just to do, if there's a small like preferential option between something that's for you and for someone else, try to do the better thing for someone else, and just try to be kind to others in general. Like very cliche things like getting up in the bus and giving the seat to an old woman is for me a very spiritual practice. let us see what's happening here in this exciting chat with all my friends. This is so cool. Emmanuel Rosen says, do you ever face pushback from members of your own community or other communities you interact with? That's an interesting question, Emmanuel. I have to say, unfortunately, not. I wish I got some more religious hate mail and fatwas and khirims and all that kind of fun stuff, because then I would know definitely that I'm doing something which is pissing off the right people and doing something good, which is the one sure sign that you are doing something good. I haven't been getting much pushback. Maybe it's just because I'm so cute and lovable. No. Oh, I have gotten some select, very cherished hate mail, which I've framed and put on my wall. For those that understand the jargon, I was told that I'm teaching Avodah Zarah, which is heresy in simple English, literally foreign worship. Although it's said that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, said the only Avodah Zarah is to believe that there is Avodah Zarah. But unfortunately, the answer is no, not enough. Let's get some more kickback and pushback from the religious communities. That would be great. Justin Berkholtz, is there a book you would recommend as a starting point for studying Jewish mysticism? I have a very basic understanding. A book to start one's understanding of Jewish mysticism. So in the video we did on the top 10 books of mysticism, I think I recommended 2 books for Jewish mysticism. One of them was Gershon Shalom's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. The other one was his Next Generation of Scholarship, Moshe Del Kabbalah New Perspectives. I would say start with Gershon Shalom if you want the scholar of the generation, of his generation, the man who founded the academic study of Jewish mysticism. If you're looking for an academic approach, that is. His Major Trends is more of a historical overview. He's written many books. He wrote a book called Kabbalah, which also goes more thematically through things. He wrote a book on origins of Kabbalah. His work is all really, really great, and he's also a very, very rigorous German philological, methodological, historical thinker, who I just love. So try Gershon Shalom. If you're looking for something more religious, more traditional, more sort of in-house than academic, Adin Steinsaltz, 13 Rose Petal, I think is the name of his book. Who else? Aryeh Kaplan has written some great introductions to Kabbalah. Joseph Dan, I think wrote as an academic work again, I think it's called Something of the Heart, and Fountain of the Heart. I could be mixing up with a different author, but Fountain of the Heart is also a good modern, more academic approach. Vegetarian says, "Peace be upon you and namaste." Thank you. Zevi, have you had any direct mystical experiences of God that you would be comfortable sharing? I might decline that question. 7 billion bees. How do you do this and not get burnt out? That's a great question. That's also a really kind question. Thank you, 7 billion bees. 7 billion bees, the bees are also getting burnt out from everything we're doing, so it's an appropriate username. Is this a time to, how far are we into the to the live stream? Is this time to get personal? And let's see. I just spilled this water all over myself. That's great. Winning. So how don't I get burnt out? So burnout is, to be honest, burnout is not like the challenge that I face. I face my own challenges, plenty of them. Generally what it is like something of like a lack of motivation, like a slump, like emotionally, mentally. I wouldn't say like depression is maybe like a bit of a strong and hard word, but just like, no motivation, no interest, like a real just down in the dumps. I've learned to like be kind to myself and to allow myself to like go through that with kindness and give myself the time to like not be super productive in the ways that we conceptualize productivity in the West. And then when I come back out and I'm like feeling again inspired and motivated to do that, to continue. And I say this with full sincerity that very often it's like seeing the really, really, really beautiful, thoughtful, appreciative comments from you guys and girls on the channel, appreciating the work that I'm putting into this channel, that really helps pull me out of those like dumps. So thank you so much. I like could really list by name the people that have been so supportive and so encouraging. Thank you. So burnout is not really my main problem. I like when I'm fired up, I go 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 until like I lose my fire, and then I give it its time. Um, Sometimes I'll get burnt out within a particular series. Like when I've done already like 4 or 5 videos in a series, you'll see that like a lot of my series will only go like 4 or 5 when there's a lot more material to do. Like the Young series, I ended after 4 videos. The Spinoza series, I ended after 4 videos. And now that I'm learning those patterns about myself, and I mean because of how much time is invested in writing, researching, writing, brainstorming, filming, editing, like it's a lot of work. So now I kind of know where my cap and limit will be. So when I plan a series, I can plan to like cover enough information in those 4 or 5 videos before like the burnout comes. But thank you. That's a very kind question. I really appreciate that. And I hope this doesn't become too suppy and personal. 7 billion bees wrote, I mean to seek good and try bettering things. How does that not get you down? Wow, if I would have read your second line, then I would have not given that whole long answer. Yeah. How do I not get burnt out from seeking good and trying to better things, which can often burn us out? Well, I think really it's seeing the goodness of humanity in of kindness and love that reinstall faith in humanity. There was a famous Holocaust survivor who said who was always asked like, how do you still believe in God? And he said, the challenge is not that I believe in God, the challenge is how do I still believe in people, which is like such a real thing. And sometimes that's hard, and I think it's seeing people do beautiful things. I'll just give 2 examples. One is my mother. My mother is like the most in the most non-assuming and non-pretentious way, she's like the holiest person that I know, in that she's absolutely completely like selfless and committed to goodness and kindness and love. So and being raised by her definitely instilled a lot of that in me. So thank you, Mom, and to my dad who supports her in her kindness, and himself is also a beacon of kindness and love and wisdom. So I think a lot of that comes from them. But even small things beyond like child rearing, just this weekend, or was it last weekend? This is past weekend. There was like a terrible tragedy up on Mount Meron for the Lag BaOmer celebrations, where I think it was 45 people were trampled to death. It was absolutely horrendous and heartbreaking. And right after, a bunch of people had messaged me overseas to ask it, because it's a place I'd been to that religious festival for a few years, and friends asked me if I was there, was I okay? People really being kind and checking in. And then another friend of mine, a new friend, his name is Yunus Saad, who is a Druze who works at the tomb of the prophet Navi Shweb, the prophet Jethro, because we're making a series on religious minorities in Israel, and we went to interview the Druze. He messaged me as well after, and he said, Zevi, my heart is so broken in the pain of your community. And an act like that of someone who doesn't identify as a Jew, reaching out also with brokenness and pain, really small moments like that really reinstall my faith in humanity and in the possibility of there being something, a collective humanity that recognizes the inherent divinity and non-otherness in each of us. So there's the actual answer to your question now that I read the second line. Hal Tuberman, Zevi just got here. I love the content. Thank you so much, Hal. It's been a pleasure interacting with all of your comments and feedback. Ari Wells says, I'm familiar with Elliot Wolfson's work. What are your thoughts on his interpretation of Chabad Messianism? I am familiar with Elliot Wolfson's work. I've been a big fan of his for a while, even if I have trouble reading him sometimes because he writes in this incredibly poetic postmodern way. I loved his book, Open Secret, which was his interpretation of Chabad Messianism. Many of the thoughts were thoughts that I'd been thinking for a while. Many of the thoughts were new thoughts which challenged me, particularly his thinking about time. I want to both get in touch with Elliot Wolfson and interview him on the channel. I would really love to do that, and I know a student of his who I'm working on that connection. I also want to do a video on Chabad Messianism, which is going to be tricky, maybe controversial, and a lot of that will incorporate ideas and research, and Elliot Wolfson did so beautifully. Next, Daniel Weistrop says, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you and want to burn you. Yeah, actually, let's hope they do that. And then they'll build monuments to you. Let's hope that they don't do any of that. But truth. Justin Burkhalter says, okay, thanks. Charley asks, what is your recipe or single ingredient for unity among? I think the single ingredient, to be cliche yet again, is love. I think love is what unites us. Love is what combines us, and love is what shows us to be one. I think in the deepest moments of love, we see the face of God. Who was that? Hugo Victor, I think, said that in Les Miserables. And I think that is the single ingredient. The recipe is more complicated because it's about how you take those ingredients and how you prepare them, and there's a whole methodology to it. And again, I don't think there's one recipe. I think unity can be inspired through religion, through art, through poetry, through philosophy. The recipe which I've clung onto here is that of mysticism, because it really contains a lot of those things in it, and trying to distill what mysticism is and how it can be compelling for a 21st century human. What drives me in this passion. And so perhaps for me, that's my recipe. 7 billion bees says, thank you for the answer. Very well worded. Thank you. 7 billion bees. All 7 billion of you. Justin says, thanks, Charley. Yeah, that's so cool. You guys are saying thank you to one another. That's nice. No worries, Justin. Oh, this is fun. See, now I get to be a spectator in your guys' conversation. This is like really, this is a real conversation. It's not just me preaching here. That's really nice. Valerie says, embrace burnout as a phoenix bird. Yeah, I love that motif of the phoenix, that the death and rebirth is a theme which is so captivating to me. The work done by Mircea on the theme of death, birth, and resurrection is really epic, and I really want to get into that on the channel. That will be coming. Bet your bottom dollar. Yeah, embracing the burnout, and then allowing to be. It takes a lot of faith and a lot of hope, a lot of trust that the burnout will lead back to a reignition. I think a lot of the Kabbalistic myth of Tzimtzum is God embracing God's own death in some sense. That happens in Tzimtzum with the hope that through the Rishimo, there'll be the energy left and the motivation left to create reality. But that may be a bit over the heads of people who don't know the complexities of Lurianic mythology. We'll have to get back into that. Thoughts on George Baltine mysticism? I don't know George Baltine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I am pleasantly surprised because whenever someone says a name in relationship to mysticism, I sure hope to know it. George Baltine was a French philosopher, intellectual working in philosophy, literature, sociology, anthropology, consumerism, and history of art. I have come across this a little. I'm going to have to check that out and come back to you. It is a pleasure to say I do not know. Hard words for people to say, particularly men. But I don't know enough. I don't know anything about his mysticism to comment. But I do remember not knowing once before and checking out his Wikipedia page, and I'm going to do the same again. So thank you for reminding me. Okay. Michael Jameson says, I know it's not particularly palatable for the masses. Ooh, exciting. I just saw one of his books is called Eroticism, so maybe that's why it's not palatable. We're all adults here. We can talk about eroticism and mysticism. They're very interconnected. Love is the most beautiful thing. Agreed. David Reckman says, Verbringen. This is water in here, David. Let it be seen and let it be told this is H2O. This is a sober Verbringen. Maybe when the clock strikes a bit later, we'll make this into a real Verbringen. John Hexfury. That's a cool name. Hello. I would love to hear your thoughts on Lurianic mysticism and the theology of Shabbatinism and Frankism. Is this something that you plan for or would be interested in? So, yes, we were just talking about some Lurianic mysticism. Lurianic mysticism, for those that don't know, is the mysticism 15th, 16th century of Isaac Luria, born in Jerusalem, moved down to Egypt, and then eventually made his debut for just 2 years in the mystical city of Tzfat in the Galilee of Israel, and really changed the world of Jewish mysticism. Much like in Jewish philosophy, there is Jewish philosophy before and after Maimonides. In Jewish mysticism, it is before and after Luria, Isaac Luria, the Arizal HaKadosh, the saintly Isaac Luria, the holy. An incredibly enigmatic character whose theology and mythology and theosophy is immense, and would take a few lifetimes just to begin to get a grasp of. I would love to present it. I would also love to bring on friends of mine who are much better, who know it much better than I do, to also share and present and perhaps interview them. And yeah, I'm also super fascinated by Shabbatinism and Frankism. We discussed Frankism briefly in our video of Jewish women mystics. We didn't get into its real theology. I'm super fascinated by Messianic mysticism in general and by this heterodoxical Messianic movements of Shabbatinism and Frankism. I'm really, really fascinated. My primary source has been Gershon Shalom's work, who really, Shalom's favorite mystic in some senses was Shabtai Tzvi, the founder of Shabbatinism, or at least the figure who inspired it. Yeah, I would love to get into that. I would love to talk about it. Definitely, there's so much in mystical traditions that we must get to, and that is definitely on my list. Thank you for reminding me. Emmanuel Rosen says, "Thank you for answering my questions. Do you associate with a particular Hasidic sect? Do you plan to make a video on Reb Zalman or Nachman of Breslev in the future?" Yes, I associate with the Chabad Hasidic sect. That is the tradition which my grandfather joined as a young man, and which has been in my family ever since, which I was born into, and I have a lot of love for. It's also particularly philosophical, perhaps the most, if not the only, systematic and philosophical tradition within the Hasidic sect, which appeals to me too. Do I plan on making a video on Reb Nachman or Reb Zalman of Breslev? There's a few Reb Zalmans. I'm not sure which Zalman you're referring to, but Zalman Shechter Shalami or Nachman of Breslev in the future. I haven't made any plans to make videos on Breslev, Reb Nachman of Breslev, but we definitely could. His Likutei Moharan is an incredible book of beautiful mysticism. The way that he connects to nature is really intense, and his theology is also super unitive. There's some really crazy Torot in his work in Likutei Moharan, which have some very, very strong theological claims. I'll just throw out one as just a candy. He says, using classical rabbinic or Jewish theological and philosophical language, which he bashes on in other places because he has a bit of an anti-philosophy tirade. He speaks about God as the mechuyev hametzius, God as the mandatory, the only obligatory existence, and whereas the rest of existence, including humanity, is efsharas hametzius, contingent existence, classic philosophical terms. And then he says that through a process of his spiritual path, of hisbodedus, and other things, one can become mechuyev hametzius. One can hareze mischayev b'nafshe. One can obligate themselves metaphysically. I would love to even just take that piece and break it down for the audience. Ari Wells says, "Can't wait for the Chabad Messianism Elliot Wolfson video. Why pass on the direct mystical question earlier?" So yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. It's going to take some time. I'm going to have to find some other filler materials so we can take time to research that and really put it together, because I want to be careful with doing that because it's my own tradition. I want to represent it authentically. Why did I pass on the direct mystical experience question earlier? That's a good question. I passed on it for a few reasons. Firstly, there's something of the mystical experience which, by its nature, is intimate and is private. And although I'm a big fan of revealing secrets, as much of the Hasidic tradition was, there are some things which are private, which are best kept private and best kept intimate. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, and also yeah, if you look at the literature of Jewish mysticism in particular, there's very, very little, for that reason, there's very, very little talk of the mystics and their own experience. Louis Jacobs put together a very small book called Jewish Mystical Testimonies, where he collected the very scant, mostly from Chaim Vital, of direct mystical testimonials. I think a lot of the contemporary conversation of mysticism Oh, it's buffering. It's back. A lot of follows like 20 or 30 years after the scholarship. That's kind of just the trickle down time that it takes, the buffer time that it takes from scholarship to get to the conversation. A lot of scholarship of mysticism 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and earlier, going really back to the German romanticists like Schleiermacher and those theologians, was focused a lot on the experience, to the exclusion of the actual theories or practices. And the scholarship recognized that to be an oversight, where it was too narrow of a vision, although it was very enticing, and it was really there as an alternative to religion, because the project of the Enlightenment, with Immanuel Kant trying to make his religion within the bounds of reason's mystical experience, mysticism became a way to have religion within the bounds of reason because it was empirical and whatnot. And then the psychological evaluation of mystical experiences became very popular. This is a great example, amongst others. And I think in the conversation about experience, what happens sometimes is, and I mean this with the greatest amount of respect and love to the experience of mysticism, what happens is that, ironically, the experience which is so dissolving of boundaries and of ego can become a very self-centered, narcissistic, even can be consumerized in a sense, which is totally self-defeating. And there's a lot of talk about sort of the spiritual ego trip that people can get on about, like, oh my gosh, I had a mystical experience, which totally defeats the purpose. And I think for that reason, scholars like Bernard McGinn and others talk about the mystical awareness. Like, what does the experience do to us as individuals? How does it change our awareness about ourselves, about reality, about the world around, about the world around us in a positive way, in a way that can be thought about methodologically and thoroughly in theory, and can also be put into practice in mystical practice, in ethics, in behavior, in techniques. And that's why I try to tend to stay away from discussion, even of things like paths to experience and meditation, because unfortunately, and we see this too much in today's social media climate, it can become just part of a self-aggrandizing narrative. And I tell people that had a mystical experience with the greatest degree of love and respect, like, so what? What now? Now that you've had your experience, what is it going to motivate you to do? And I think the prophets of ancient Israel, a great example. There's a lot of debate whether the prophets are best conceptualized as mystics or not. There won't be an end to that debate. But fundamentally, the way that I see the prophets are as people that had, and of all traditions, I should say, people that have had a thoroughly shattering mystical experience that revealed to them the nature of reality is fundamentally unified, and they went and they acted on it by making ethical demands upon themselves, upon the people around them. And that's those are the two reasons why I decided to turn out the question, both because it's a personal thing, an intimate thing, and because I think we need to shift the focus away from experience solely to incorporate theory and practice. I hope that answered the question. Let's see, what's next? Michael Jameson said, check out his book Theory on Religion. I think it would pique your interest more. Whose book, Theory on Religion? That's the French Baptiste, whatever his name is. Gabe DePaul, how many languages do you speak? Do you read books in multiple languages? That's an easy question to answer after all these difficult theological questions. Thank you, Gabe. I speak English. I've been told I'm very articulate in my English speaking, which is a compliment, I guess. I live here in Israel, and sometimes people assume I'm Israeli. I don't know why, and they say your English is so good. So that's funny. I speak English. I speak Hebrew. I speak Yiddish. For those that know what Yiddish is, it's like the Jew language. It's an amalgamation of Hebrew and German. It's a very beautiful language. I read two dead languages, which is Biblical Hebrew, which is a different language than modern Hebrew. Yes, it counts. And Aramaic, which is the language of the Talmud and of the Zohar and others. So 3 living languages, 2 dead languages. Charley says, I'm also dyslexic as far as reading goes. So if I mess up your questions and your names, I hope you forgive me. It's just my brain. Charley says, have you ever encountered Alejandro Jodorowsky's films and his exploration of mysticism. Yes, I watched some mind-bending Jodorowsky. How do you pronounce his name? I watched Mystic Mountain, I think it was, which is so rich in symbolism and in art. It's a real trip. If you want to go for a brain trip, go check out some Jodorowsky. I haven't seen him exploring mysticism outside of his films. I would love to know if he did so explicitly or implicitly. Yeah, the relationship between mysticism and art is real. I'm not particularly an artist. It's a talent which I lack, but I did watch that film of him and I loved it. Rose Lotus Mystic says Zevi, comma. Vic, comma. Magic Girl Weeb. What do you think about Hindu mysticism? What is your position about God/divine? Yeah. I think Hindu mysticism is epic. I have been particularly interested in and attracted to Avada Vedanta by the hands of Adi Shankara, and I think Hindu mysticism. I really think that every civilization that spent enough time contemplating themselves and the world around them came to the same unit of truths, which gives them a real power. What's that line from William James that in every clime and creed, these truths have been spoken enough in a way, in their unanimity, a way to make even the critic stop and think. So I think that every tradition has an incredibly beautiful, rich mystical tradition, and I think acknowledging that universality of mysticism is only the first step. Once we've acknowledged that, we can then ask, okay, so then what is unique and beautiful about this specific tradition in itself? Because sometimes the universalistic, perennialistic attitude can sometimes just make one big mess, one big challenge of all the mystical traditions. And I think that loses the beauty of each one of the traditions in and of themselves. The question of what is specifically unique and beautiful about Hindu mysticism is a great question. I think as far as the Eastern or Far Eastern tradition goes, the way that Hinduism, in perhaps very large, oversimplifying terms, in juxtaposition to Buddhist mysticism, which in some way is implosive, where the fundamental theory in much of philosophical Buddhist mysticism, particularly Mahayana, is that of the doctrine of shunyata, that there is really nothingness. It's an implosion of ego, an implosion of all that is, in a way that leads, I think, to the same mystical space that every tradition does in a very fascinating way. And I think, as in contrast to that, Hindu mysticism is explosive, where the self really becomes the all. The perhaps the most famous line from Hindu mysticism, from the Vedas, of Sattvam Asi, that thou art that whatever you encounter in reality is just yourself, is Brahman, is the true self, is an incredible mystical vision and tradition, one which is woven into a very complex and beautiful, intricate, particular history and mythology, which I'm no expert of, but I look forward to learning more about together with all of you. What's your position about God/divine? I think that is clear from the whole project here. God is the totality of existence, the ground of being, the nothingness and the all. So Emmanuel Rosen says yes. Zalman Schachter, a big fan of mine. Sorry, a big hero of mine. I wonder if he would have been a fan of mine. That's an interesting question. A bit egoic. Zalman Schachter, for those that don't know, is one of the progenitors, or continuers rather, of what's known today as Neo-Hasidic mysticism. He's the founder of Renewal Judaism in particular, and his work has been very inspiring in that he really thought independently and critically and intelligently about mysticism in a universal, perennialistic way, while being very deeply rooted, able to incorporate a mystics. Meister Eckhart is often touted as the premier philosophical mystic in Christianity, although he has very strong competition. There are many others. But yeah, and Abulafia is an incredible mystic who was not very well known until recently, but a lot of work, both religiously by Ari Kaplan and academically by Moshe Idel, have really resurrected the character of him and and we're glad for that. We've done one class on him. Philip and Justin over at Esoterica and Let's Talk Religion, respectively, also put out classes on him. All fantastic material to help people get into him. I still do plan on getting to the questions that were posed originally. Don't worry. I have time. Time seems to kind of fade away when I get to hang out and answer questions with you. Dal Tsu says I'm here anyways. Dal left because he had work, or she, actually don't know, or neither. And they're here to participate with us, and that is very kind of you. I hope that your boss doesn't, or whoever it is, doesn't give you a hard time for slacking off to come join Q&As while you're supposed to be working. What do I know about Taoism? I don't know a whole lot about Taoism, but the Tao that cannot be named is not the true Tao. I've read a bunch of secondary literature on Taoism. I have friends that are more into Taoism that have studied Chinese to get a better sense of it from the inside. I think it's epic, obviously. I think the way that it relates to nature is really beautiful and really sort of just unitive and in line with the way that things are. That is what the Tao is. It's the way it's just being in line with the way of things, going with the flow and not fighting against reality. I hope to learn more about Taoism, and I hope to also explore that here on the channel, because it's a bona fide mystical tradition on the global scale as much as any other. Gorads, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, says, do you ever encounter resistance against Spinozistic pantheism in the intellectual Orthodox Jewish circles today? Is it a common thing to rehabilitate, or is it something to rehabilitate Spinoza in some way? Wow, I wish there were more intellectual Jewish Orthodox circles, or at least ones that I was aware of that I could hang out with. that would be nice. No, I'm being mean. When I talk to people around, people sometimes like give me a bit of a queer eye for getting into Spinoza. There is a trend to want to rehabilitate Spinoza. There's a Sephardi rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, maybe Nathan Cardozo it is, or one of his ilk, who's working to rehabilitate Spinoza. It's not so vogue in Jewish Orthodox intellectual circles to want to rehabilitate him. I think people may be a bit scared to touch him because he was put in cherem and maybe he should be left there. I mean, that's not what I think. I think whatever. You know what I think about him. I love him. That's a short answer. Valerie says, having internet issues again, maybe by see you. Thanks for coming. Justin Burkholdt says, in my opinion, mystical experience is just the awakening, it's the beginning of the path, not the end. Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think a lot of what mysticism teaches us is that it's not about the end at all. It is about the path, or the path is the end in some sense. The collapsing of means and ends into one another, I think, is a very mystical idea. Experience, theory, and practice should have a circular relationship. They should all inform one another. Absolutely. It's experience which leads to theory, which leads to practice, which leads to experience, which leads to theory, which leads to practice. And I can keep 100%. Rose Lotus Mystic says, Zevi, Rose Lotus Award, perennialist with Kabbalistic flavor. Rock on, Mystic brother. Kudos from Dallas, Texas. Thank you, Rose Lotus Mystic. It's been such a delight to have you join us here at the channel, to join us for this wonderful journey. Gabe DePaul says, cheers, man, love the channel. Thank you, Gabe. That's really kind. Thank you. We love it too. We have so much in common. Rose Lotus Mystic, are you familiar with the life work of Ken Wilber? Yes. Yeah, I'm familiar with Ken Wilber. I've read more than one of his works. I've read a few of his works. I have complex thoughts about Ken Wilber. If you're interested in knowing more, ask me and I'll tell you. Ollie Turm says, what mundane or things do you enjoy doing that gives you joy, make it easier to unwind and relax? Like aside from all this, you mean? I'm not going to be a smartass and question the use of the word mundane. in the mystic sense that the mundane is the sacred and the sacred is the mundane. But I'm going to take the question at face value. What? It's so funny to like switch gears out of like thinking like philosophically and this and that, and then being asked like mundane and ordinary things. I enjoy reading, even when it's not like philosophy. I enjoy I've recently got into some fiction. Kurt Vonnegut has been a real pleasure to read, and others. A friend of mine is trying to get me to read Infinite Jest, which I don't think I'll do, but that's an ordinary thing which I enjoy doing. I very much enjoy walking in nature. I live, thank God, near a beautiful forest, and I get to walk in it whenever I want. There's no charge; it's free. One of the very few things in this world that is still free. Walking in the forest is really nice. I have 2 dogs, and they come for me on the walk sometimes. One of them, he has an eye infection now. He needs a refuah shlema, as we would say in Hebrew. All pray for him, please, for Pishtan. Yeah, I enjoy getting in some exercise. Enjoy like keeping my body in shape along with my other components of this thing that make up the human. Exercise is great. I used to love biking and swimming. I do less of that here now just because I don't have the tools to do it. Just general like calisthenics. I enjoy really ordinary things. I really enjoy nature and like seeing, like watching nature in her processes, watching like what's blossoming and what's dying and what's coming back. It's really incredible to live in nature and see those things. I really love having a hot shower and a massage. Like I don't know how, like I'm pretty much a normal person. I enjoy normal things. A movie here and there. Sometimes there's some good cinema that's thought provoking and stuff. Alejandro's movie is The Holy Mountain. That's correct, not Mystic Mountain. Yes, thank you for the correction, and a really great movie, a mind bender, and a great movie. Shimon Weinbach, brother, thank you for joining us. He certainly would have. I have no idea what we're talking about, Shimon. The case most of the time because you're so beyond me in every dimension. Get on my level. I love you, Shimon. Where are you, Shimon? Come over if you're in town, and you can join us for this live chat. What do I think about yoga? Okay, I haven't explored yoga philosophically, if that's what you're asking about so much. Yoga is, from what I understand, a lone tradition in some sense, separate from Hinduism. I shouldn't say. I don't really know. But if you're asking about yoga in like the physical exercise, I think it's great. I think it's really great to stretch. I think it's great to get in touch with your body. We could stop and do a yoga break right now. We could do some lotus poses. Yeah, sorry for that inadequate answer. Magical girl weeb. Jason Johnson, have to go. Wish to you all love. Thank you, Jason. Ari Wells, if you could have one conversation with anyone dead or alive, whom would you choose to speak with and why? Wow. I don't know. Maybe myself. That's really narcissistic. Am I dead or alive? That's the real question. I was thinking about this because we had a similar question in the main questions here, and I do want to get back to that maybe once we've exhausted these live questions. But I feel like there should be priority to the living instead of the dead. On that note, there's so many people. I feel like I'm gonna get in trouble for some of the names I'm gonna say or want to say. But this is kind of a personal thing, and I don't know if this will really resonate with much people. But what came up for me personally when I was thinking about that question, as it was phrased differently in the previous questions, and what I'm referring now as the dead questions, which is not nice, is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's really my Rebbe, who I never got to meet because I was born in '94, the year that he passed away, and in many ways he's like the one person who I would want to talk to. Yeah. Hello from South Africa. Where in South Africa are you? I'm gonna try and pronounce your name. Dickalidi? I'm a bit dyslexic, sorry. I lived in Cape Town for 2 years. Where are you from, bro? Or sis? Isaac Sates. Gonna head back to work. Love what you're doing. Keep it up, Zevi. Thank you, Isaac, for joining us here at the project. It's been so fun to have you join, and you've been sneaking there in the background this whole time without saying anything. And shame on your brother Ari for not telling you about the channel and for you having to discover it through somewhere else. Through Let's Talk Religion. I'm gonna give Ari a scolding when I get back to Australia. Samuel says yes, finally live stream. Woohoo! Do you know the film director Andrei Tarkovsky, and who are your favorite poets? Wow, we have a lot of film questions here. Tarkovsky, he was a Russian film. Did he make something about he made a movie about a horse? Is that the same Tarkovsky? Sorry, the same Tarkovsky? I don't know him, is what I'm basically trying to say. Who are my favorite poets? I love so many poets. I don't really remember the names so well because I reserve my name memories for philosophers, but not that there's a real difference between philosophers and poets. Okay, the first one that came to mind was William Blake. William Blake is he was a crazy mystic, an ecstatic, a poet, an artist, and everything. His poetry is epic. A lot of Yeats's poetry I find to be very moving. There was who was I reading? Emily Dickinson. Her poetry is mind blowing. I have friends. I mean, maybe I have some friends that write some really mind blowing poetry, and also knowing them makes it really fresh and raw. Shout out to my friends. You know who you are. Yeah. There's also like a whole lot of mystical poets whose work is really incredible. I think Dante would be included on that list. I think people like Novalis, the German romanticist, would be included on that list. I think people like Walt Whitman is who I was going to say next. Walt Whitman, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Rumi, Hafiz, Halderlin. I mean, there's just so many incredible. The crossover between poetry and mysticism is just so deep and so rich. So yeah, there's definitely a lot. The Sufi poets, I think I mentioned Rumi already. Did I mention Hafiz? Just incredible poetry. What do I think of G. W. F. Hegel? Hegel. So that's Dylan Shaw's question. Dylan Shaw, I think you confused your first and last name there. I like Hegel. I like the German idealists in general. I think that their philosophy is often just straight mysticism, in a way that's really difficult and obscure, which kind of makes it more like a riddle and a puzzle that wants to pull you in and get through and get into. There's a book that I was reading recently on Hegel and the Hermetic tradition. I can't remember who the author was right now, but I'm fascinated by the German idealists, by Hegel, by Schelling, by Fichte, and later Schleiermacher and Schopenhauer and the people that are influenced by that movement. There's a direct line of continuation from Meister Eckhart, who was mentioned before, to people like Jacob Boehme, an incredible German mystic who I love, through to the what's it called? The Swabian pietists, is that their name? Straight through to Hegel, and their thinking is very rich. I want to make a video on a series actually on mysticism and modern Western philosophers, and I will tell you who will be in that series because I have the file here waiting for that day to come. In that series is going to be this is in alphabetical order. Buber, Derrida, Fichte, Hegel, Heidegger, Husserl, Hamann, who's lesser known, Krauss, lesser known, Nietzsche, Novalis, Colin Wilson, lesser known as well, Bertrand Russell, who wrote an essay on logic and mysticism, Schelling, Schleiermacher, Schopenhauer, Spinoza, who we've done, Alfred North Whitehead, Wittgenstein. So he's on my list, and I hope to get to him. Shimon Weibach says the Jewish canon, unlike the Greek that started with Plato, includes mystical revelations and the non. That's where the sentence ends. It's the non. It's Shimon has just thrown us into the absence, into the Shimon, as you do, thrown us right into the abyss, Shimmy. Right, we're still sober, and you've just mid sentence, just into the dark night of the soul. I don't even know what to make of the sentence anymore. Thanks, Isaac. Oh, Shimon Weibach says intellectual attainment into the non-intellectual attainment of the divine, Ezekiel, etc. How do you suppose that affected the Jewish tradition through the ages? Okay, let's read that all as one question now. Sans like ego death in the middle. The Jewish canon, unlike the Greek that started with Plato. The Greek canon started with Plato. Shimon, is this something that we're? I'm only doing this because Shimmy's a good friend of mine. I wouldn't do this to any random heckler. Includes mystical revelations and the non-intellectual attainment of the divine, Ezekiel, etc. Ezekiel chapter 1. How do you suppose that affected the Jewish tradition through the ages? Yeah, I think it had a major impact on the tradition. Firstly, I think that there is a lot of talk of mystical revelation and mystical metaphysics in the pre-Socratics. We made a video on that, and I'm sure you've seen that. But the prophetic experiences, the mystical experiences that are recorded in the biblical canon, in the Jewish and Hebrew canon, go on to have a tremendous direct historical impact on Jewish history that we know of. In that there was a whole tradition of early Jewish mysticism, which academically is seen to predate the Kabbalistic tradition, although traditionally the term Kabbalah is used to include everything. And that tradition, academically pre-Kabbalah, as we said, is called the tradition of Meiser Merkava, of the account, the story, the attempt to articulate the vision of the chariot that Ezekiel has. And that continues directly into the literature of the Shir Kema and the Saratera and Heichalis, and so there's a direct paper trail from Ezekiel all the way up into the Kabbalists and the Hasidic thinkers that begin with the inclusion of those narratives. And I think what it does is it inserts a fundamental biblical basis for the authenticity and the depth of these experiences from the very beginning. And I think we did a video, I think, on a bit of the origins of Kabbalah, and I think we discussed this, and there's been so much good work written on it. Gershon Shalom's written about how we get from the Merkava mysticism of Ezekiel to the Kabbalists. Paul Schaefer has written recently work. So that's indisputable. Emmanuel Rosen, thank you for answering all my questions. I've got to go, but I'll make sure to email you about my first question. I cannot believe you're leaving us after I answered all your questions. Kidding, you're welcome to come and go as you please. Yeah, hit me up with an email. I'll be happy to answer it. Charley says, sadly, I have to return to reality, but this has been so wonderful to share in this with all of you. Love to you all. Yeah, Charley. Thank you for sharing with us and joining us. Even though you insinuated that this was somehow not reality. I'm kidding. Go back to your wife and children, Charley. They need you. That's where the real work is. Samuel Tarkovsky. Shimon says, I'm in New York still. We'll be back in the land next week. And when he says in the land, he means in the land, people. You know it. See you at the eye of the daughter soon. I will see you by the daughter's eye. Praise for you, Zevi dog. Cousin Doobie-Doo cat. I don't know if I'm a cat person or a dog person. That was the question that no one asked here. But thank you for your praise, Rose Lotus Mystic Doobie-Doo cat. Gauteng province Radberg, good to be with you. Nice. I lived in gardens in Cape Town, so probably not too far from one another. Yes, Justin adds, I think, to the list of poets, maybe Atara's Conference of the Birds, 100%. I must have written here, thanks, Charley, for being here with us. Much love while I was speaking. I'm just multitasking here. Thank you, Alyssa. Ollie says, sorry for the trip up. I noticed on my own path, I noticed on my own journey when I got to metaphysical and celestial, my thinking, it got increasingly difficult to relate to the tangible reality, which is, yeah, it's not help. I mean, there's definitely a lot of mysticism which can be unhealthy and which can take us away from the world instead of taking us into the world to unite with reality. And I think we have to be aware of those, and there's time and place for those too. They're not all bad. Also full of magic and wonder, 100%. Wonder and mystery and magic. That's the stuff that ignites our soul. I guess I'm not really paying attention to the time here. I don't mean time. We're not always on speaking terms, but I guess I'm just gonna keep going until I answer all the questions and maybe answer the ones on the list as well that I said I would answer, and then we'll say goodnight. Yeah. Hull Tuberman, Western philosophy plus mysticism sounds interesting. Were Thoreau and Emerson on that list? Thoreau and Emerson should be on that list. I'm a huge fan of the transcendentalists, Thoreau and Emerson. I was mainly looking at, on that list is mainly like continental European philosophers. Thoreau and Emerson, I would perhaps put on a different list. I would address them as mystics first, and explore mysticism as such, as opposed to some of these other thinkers, Nietzsche, Schleiermacher, Schelling, who I may see first as philosophers and approach how they're interacting with mysticism. That's perhaps why they're not on the list for those two reasons. Ollie says, so it just interested me. I'm not sure. There's like a bit of a breakup in the conversation. Kevin Nicholas, everything was and is Kabbalah. Sure. I don't know what you mean. That's very enigmatic. Kabbalah has been tremendously influential throughout Western mysticism, at least from the 13th century onwards. So much of Western mysticism, occultism, esotericism, magic has been deeply influenced by Kabbalah, then by Christian Kabbalah. Is that what you mean historically? Do you mean metaphysically, that everything is Kabbalah? I don't know. Cat and dog eye infections, teriyaki ointment. I'm gonna take a note of that thing, and I'm going to check it out because my dog needs some ointment, or else they're really just gonna lose the eye. It's really sad, and they're really in a lot of pain, and it hurts me. Kevin Nicholas says, your friend you had also coming to the realization that everything is Kabbalah. Let me tell you something. I'm coming to the realization that everything is Yehuda Katz. I love Yehuda Katz. He was actually just here the other day. I had the great pleasure of sitting down with him, catching up, sending so much love to you. He's now going on to teach, and he is going to change the world one person at a time, because he's a beautiful, beautiful human who I have so much love for. And he's mad in love with Kabbalah, particularly Lurianic Kabbalah. And I want to bring him back to break us down, to really get into the nitty-gritty of the what's known as the 8 Shmuos, the 8 stages, although that's not the translation of Lurianic Kabbalah. Eugene says, I just clicked on the video. Eugene C. Cabin. Eugene, is that really your last name, C. Cabin? That's really cool. Eugene C. Cabin, I just clicked on the video and see a similar question above. I'm curious about your thoughts on Shabbatinism and Frankism are. I don't think you have to. I don't think you made a video about this. Thanks. I haven't made a video about it. There's too much to say about it on one foot here. I will make a video about it, God willing. Let me say this: Shabbatinism and Frankism is Jewish mysticism, unchecked. It's mysticism let off the rails of orthodoxy and morality and anything that would keep it in check, and is just left to run down that down those rails at full speed, and and the mess that it creates is tremendous and fascinating. And the theology is incredible, and there is a theological consistency to the logic. It's not all madness, although it looks mad from the outside. When you begin to read their literature and secondary literature, it's really incredible. I think there's a lot of comparison between a lot of their thinking and a lot of more mystical, antinomian, anarchistic, millenarian thinking. I'm just reading now Norman Kahn's Pursuit of the Millennia, and I think that's again a good example. Many traditions there, the Brethren of the Free Spirit, the Cathars, and others, the Bechins in some cases, where it's mysticism without checks, which is fascinating. Like, I'm absolutely fascinated. Kevin Nicholas, reality is mysticism. You've been tricked into thinking it isn't. Yes, I would also say the inverse is true. One of my favorite lines is that from the brilliant Anglican scholar Evelyn Underhill, who wrote one of the classics on mysticism called Mysticism. She writes, mysticism is the art of union with reality. Yeah, embracing reality truly is I think what mysticism calls for, against the notion that it's escapist or otherworldly. I think it's very this worldly. It's very present. It's very imminent. It's epic. The Nemeton, no questions here. Congratulations again. Everyone who is watching, please go and check out the Nemeton. Check out his channel, Riva. He's doing great work exploring Kabbalah and other mystical traditions. River, you were one of the first people to give us a shout out when we were still a teeny tiny itty bitty channel, and it was so gracious and appreciated. And thank you for that. I'll be grateful forever. Nemeton has a very, very cool and deep understanding of Kabbalah, which is epic, coming from it from the outside, unlike some of us who were schlepped through the tradition from the inside. And the fact that he has no questions just shows you what an absolute mage he is, that he's beyond all questions. He's higher than questions. I love him, man. Sheva Lachman, leaving now. It's been great seeing you on my screen. I've really been enjoying the channel. See you soon. Cheers. Thank you, Sheva. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and to converse and to hear your challenges and questions about mysticism and Jewish theology and whatnot. And thanks for all the feedback on the content. It's been really helpful to hear from a real life human. Those things. You remember what those things were like? Mendel Lester. Hey Mendel, what's up, man? How radical is the Hasidic doctrine of the divine personal providence in the broader universal mystical traditions, and how has it affected broader strands of thought? The Hasidic doctrine of divine personal providence. So Mendel is referring to a Hasidic doctrine which is referred to as Hashgacha Pratit. Correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not what you're referring to. Where in general Jewish theology, there was a notion of Hashgacha Klalit, that God supervises, God's providence is over the world and its actions in a general way, that God doesn't necessarily watch over or orchestrate the particulars of reality, but is there on the big scale of things. And one of the revolutions in Hasidic mystical thought, an idea which it borrowed from Kabbalistic thought, was the notion that God's providence, the personal providence, is in the particulars of reality. Please correct me quickly if this is not what you're referring to, because I'm about to answer that question. How radical is it in the broader universal mystical tradition? How radical is it compared to other mystical traditions? It's not so radical. It's a fairly standard doctrine amongst mystical traditions. In a lot of Islamic mysticism, and even seeped out of mysticism into other areas of Islamic thought, is an idea which is known as occasionalism, that God is present and orchestrating and creating every occasion, every frame of reality, and everything as it happens. It's a thought which you find in many mystical traditions, and I think I don't say this to take away from the beauty or the grandeur or profundity of the Hasidic mystical tradition, which I certainly think it is. It's my own tradition. But I think that a lot of these ideas are the logical conclusion of grappling with mystical experience, which is a human experience, and reality. So let me phrase that again. We as humans are prone to have this thing which is being called the mystical experience, and we also have ordinary experience reality. And when those two things are attempted to be reconciled, a lot of the logic and a lot of the metaphysics, and I mean earlier the theology, metaphysics, theology, mythology of mysticism emerges naturally from the conjoiner of those two normal things. If that makes sense, that's kind of how I schematize my understanding of mysticism. So I think that the fact that many traditions come to these same conclusions doesn't detract from any one tradition, but just shows how yes, these are the conclusions that a thinking person would come to after a few hundred years, trying to make sense of those two experiences: the experience of transcendence or immanence or intimacy or ego death or whatever it is, and the experience of ordinary everyday reality. Um, and you can really sort of follow the logic of each thing, and the fact that God is present in the creation of each thing. This idea of hashgacha pratit, of occasionalism and Sufism, I think, is a logical conclusion. How how had it affected broader strands of thought? Broader strands of thought, does that mean beyond broader strands of thought within Jewish thought, outside of Jewish thought? I'm not sure what that means. Jewish mysticism had very little impact outside of Hasidic mysticism had very little impact outside of the Hasidic world. It was very insular. The first people to open their mouths even about Hasidic doctrine to the outside world was probably first someone like Solomon Maimon, followed by people like Hillel Zeitlin, and then really most popularly by Maran Buba in his Hasidic stories, and later in his philosophy, in his Ein Thou, where that thought began to make its way into the conversation. And now I think people that are sort of more woke about mysticism, when they're speaking about universal traditions, will include Hasidic mysticism as one of the world's mystical traditions that should be included in any such reckoning. And I think that Hasidic mysticism has a tremendous amount of beauty, and the rest of the world's mystical traditions will benefit by including it in the conversation. And a lot of what we're doing here at the channel is also to do that. I mean, my own tradition being the Hasidic tradition, when I'm discussing other movements and thinkers and traditions, it's very difficult for me to not mention parallels and comparisons and points of reference from within the Hasidic tradition, which I do frequently. We did that in the Spinoza series, and we will continue to do that to include the Hasidic mystical tradition in the rest of the world traditions. And there's a lot of traditions that have been neglected, that have been overlooked. A lot of indigenous traditions that we have a lot to learn from. And sometimes when we just focus on like the big well-known traditions, we miss out the beauty in some of these smaller, lesser-known ones. So thank you for bringing up that question. Rose Lotus Mystic, blessings and gratitude to all the fellow followers of the mystery. Yes. Someone whose username is in Russian, and I don't read Russian, unfortunately. What kind of difference in the Kabbalah and Sufi can you enlighten us on the subject? Yeah, okay, so there's a tremendous amount of different practices amongst the Kabbalists and the Sufis. There's a lot of similarity as well. A common perhaps one of the most common Sufi mystical practices is that of, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, that of dhikr. Dhikr, it's like a silent DZ, I don't know how to pronounce it. That of zikr, where through there's different forms of it, but in a general sort of overview sense, through the recitation of the name of God, Allah, and through the combination of varying different body movements, sometimes dance, sometimes rhythmic moving, and breathing sort of holotropically through with the mantra, is a very common form of Sufi practice, which is practiced in many zawiyas, many Sufi houses, many tariqas across the world. I had the great fortune of witnessing a zikr here in the old city of Jerusalem, in the Zawiya Afriniya, in the Afghanistan Zawiya, in the Afghanistani Sufi house, and that was an incredible experience. I wasn't able to film it and share it with you, unfortunately, but you can go online and see those traditions being thicker. Thank you. You can see those traditions being practiced. Practice in mystical practice amongst the Kabbalists. There's different forms of practice. Most mystical practice. See, it's a bit hard to talk about my own tradition, because the thing which you know most about is the thing which you know how little you know about, and therefore don't want to talk about. to do it in injustice, most mystical practice in the Kabbalistic and later Hasidic tradition evolved around Jewish prayer. So the classic Jewish prayer, Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, was used as an opportunity to practice meditation, contemplation, and Veikut, union with the divine. Many Kabbalists had a practice of Yichudim, whereby meditating on the names of God that were in the prayer, they would try to unite those aspects within themselves and within God above in a theurgical practice, as it's known academically. That's a mainstay in Kabbalistic practice. In contemporary Hasidic practice, there are things which are a bit closer to something like a dhikr, which is forms of song and dance, which really moves a person emotionally and physiologically. I mean, we did make a video comparing the metaphysics of Jewish mysticism and Sufism. It would be an entirely separate half-an-hour discussion to really go through, and I would have to do the research as well to really go through and compare the mystical practices of those traditions. It would definitely be a well-spent energy and time to do that. Neematon says, I'm too flattered, just thrilled to see your awesome messages spreading out. Thank you so much, River. Thank you for helping us spread it. It's really thanks to all the help that we've had in being able to share a message of peace, love, unity, and through the tools of philosophy, and not just through being hippies with the flowers in our beards. You see, there are no flowers in this beard, just philosophy and humor. Okay. Eugene C. Gabin, who still didn't tell us if that's his real last name, said, I freaking love your work, man. So this might be super duper controversial question, but I'm so curious about what your thoughts are on the work of John Allegro. Yeah, I don't know if anything is too controversial here. John Allegro was a scholar of early Christianity. He wrote some really incredible early work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is really fascinating, the way that he describes the Qumran communities. A lot of it is his own imagination involved because a lot of the documents still hadn't been released by when he was writing, but that really, really great work. Allegro, I'm guessing when you say controversial, you're referring more to his work on the New Testament and on his theory that Jesus was a psychedelic mushroom. So what's the name of that book? It's called The Mushroom and the Cross, I think. I read it a few years ago. I found it on the street just when I was looking for it, which often happens to me with books. I want to read a book. It's like on my to read list, and then I'll just find it on the street. It's really great. Thank you, Allah. And so I read it. It's really hectic and confusing because he's writing what sounds crazy, but he doesn't write it like a crazy person. He writes like someone who really knows his Greek and his New Testament and his botany and his history really, really freaking well in a way that like a layman like me in those subjects has no grasp on. So all I can say is I thought it was daring and controversial and fun. Christians may have felt differently about it, and I apologize if they did. But yeah, I don't have like a scholarly or like a professional response to that question, just a layman's response. Mendel Lester says, great answers. Thank you. Thank you, Mendel, for that feedback. Hall Tuberman, nice. Samuel, hello again. About Tarkovsky, I don't know which films you mean exactly, but there are a lot of horses in Tarkovsky films. Yeah. There's one, did he make a film called The Turin Horse? Is that him? Appreciate you. Great answer. Thank you so much. I appreciate you too. I wish I knew what your name was. I can't see I can't read your name in Russian. If you tell me what it is, I'll be able to thank you by name. Lol, what for a crazy theory. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, that's for sure. Dal Tsu, what do you think of what do you think many modern scientific thinkers align with some mystic thought? Do you think many modern, I think you meant to write many modern scientific thinkers, but I prefer the question as many modern scientific thinkers. modern scientific thinking that specifically comes from people that are diminutive in stature, midgets and the such. They would have a different perspective on reality because they're seeing things from Down. No, I've only love for people of all sizes, all shapes and sizes. Do you think many modern scientific thinkers align with some mystical thought? Yeah. I think there's a tremendous amount of overlap between modern scientific thinking and mystical thought. It's something which has been explored, something which I have looked into and read, something which I'm also skeptical about for two reasons. One is because, actually, I'm not going to answer this question just yet because it's a very similar question to something that was asked here in the previous questions. I'm going to answer that. It almost looks like we're finished with these live questions. Sacred Mushroom and a Crust, that's the one. Lawrence Krauss's book, Universe from Nothing, for instance. Hold that thought. Someone asked me here about the Tao of physics. I'm going to answer that together. Are the meditations in Kabbalah derived from other religions, traditions, Buddhism, etc.? Oh, okay. So, if they're derived from other traditions, religions, it's not from Buddhism. That's not how it would have gone geographically, historically. There's a lot of metaphysics, not necessarily meditations, that there's sort of two ways of seeing this. Either they're derived from perhaps like Neoplatonic systems of metaphysics, and from Jewish Neoplatonists, Ibn Gabriel is a good example, or they're borrowing the language of Neoplatonic thinkers to frame the metaphysics. That's kind of a lighter approach to the issue. In terms of meditations itself, the meditative systems of Kabbalah are very particularistic to Jewish practice, Jewish ritual. A lot of them are built around Jewish ritual observance, halakha, the festivals, in ways that really can't be taken from other traditions. They're really very specific to Judaism. There's been work done on what's known as anomian Jewish mystical practices, which means Jewish mystical practices such as Jewish mystical practices which aren't tied to specific Jewish ritual forms, by Moshe Idel, and those have perhaps some more ability to be derived from other traditions. To connect this to what was asked earlier about Abraham Maimonides, the son of Moses Maimonides, there's good reason to believe that he incorporated some practices of Sufism explicitly into his own mystical work and brotherhood. So that's perhaps a brief answer. Now that we've kind of got to the bottom of the live questions, let's turn to the previous questions. Hal Tuberman asked, are you familiar with Quakerism? Would you share your thoughts on it? So I'm not super familiar with Quakerism. I am a big fan of what's known as one of the early friends, or also known as the Friends of God, George Fox, who's sometimes referred to as the founder of Quakerism. I discovered his writings through William James, and I fell in love right away and recognized a true mystic in him. And also someone who was challenging the religious structures of his time, which I also like. I like that rebellious spirit. The basic notions, as far as I understand, of Quakerism, although there are many forms of Quakerism and they're not a monolithic movement, is an idea of direct and continuing revelation, that God's revelation is direct to the person, that one does not need any mediator, any ecclesiastical authorities to tell them what God's revelation is, but God speaks and reveals God's self directly to the person, and that it's a continuing revelation. It's revelation which continues to happen and go on. It's not something which just happened once, but something which is perpetual. And that's part of their doctrine, that every single one of us has the Spirit of God dwelling within us. And it's by being in touch with that Spirit of God that we're in touch with the revelation of God. And also means that we contain essentially the divine essence, because if God is essential and infinite, any part of God which dwells within the human must too be essential and infinite. And therefore we are all capable of a direct experience of God. This is like classic Quaker theology. And for that reason, I think Quakerism is again, like pretty straight mysticism. The Quaker terminology which is used to describe this is that of God in everyone, that there is within every human that of God. which is just a beautiful idea, and it really leads to an idea of equality in Quaker communities, that we're all equal because of that of God that we all possess in the eyes of God. Something which was extended even very beautifully to Native Americans when the Quakers were originally settling into North America, where Native Americans received a tremendous amount of abuse and I mean, what can I even call it? Attack and rape and all other kinds of horrendous things, and just pure dehumanization. The Quakers took them in as brothers and equals in the eyes of God, which is really incredible. And I think that really shows the fruit of mysticism at its finest, that recognition of the unity and the divinity of each. Yeah, that's and that's pretty much what I know of Quakerism. One of the early Quaker cities, I think, that was founded was Philadelphia, which literally means the city of love, Philadelphia, which ironically is also the name of one of the names of my own mystical tradition, which is Lubavitch. It's the more popular name is Chabad, but the more in-house name is Lubavitch. Lubavitch also means Lubavitch, the hamlet, the town, the city of love. So Philadelphia is a direct translation of Lubavitch. So there you go. The Quakers and the Lubavitchers are united on that point. Let us head back to the live chat, and then we'll come back to a question here from last week. The Turin Horse is by Bellatar. It's very Tarkovsky-like. There you go. I just knew. Thank you for that correction. I'm not a big film buff. I'll let you know that. So I need to catch up on my cinematography. Lord Roku says, I see well in Kabbalistic. In Lorena Kabbalah, you rise up by observing halacha, as far as I understand it. Thank you. Yeah, Lorena Kabbalah is definitely tied into, as most of Kabbalah is tied directly into the halachic framework in a very exquisite way. Blah blah says, hi Zevi. Over the quarantine, I found that I have crypto-Jewish ancestors. Your channel has helped me embrace those roots and learn about Jewish mysticism. A million thank yous from me to you. Blah blah. Thank you so much for that very, very beautiful message. It's so incredible to hear these kind of messages from people all over the freaking world, coming from the wildest places, to hear that you have found your crypto-Jewish roots. I would love to hear about that journey for you, what that's been like, where your family's from. We've recently been doing a lot of work in Spinoza, who also came from Portugal and Spain, where a lot of crypto-Jews came from. A million you're welcomes back to you, blah, blah. Kevin Nicholas. It's actually the other way around. First of all, there are a lot of Kabbalists in meditation, but most of them have not been published and only exist in manuscripts and oral transmission. I'm not, okay, because of like the way the chat's working, I'm not exactly sure what you're responding to, but yes, a lot of things, yeah, are only in oral transmission. And there are things which I've been told orally, which I cannot repeat to you unless you join the Patreon. I'm just messing. And about Taoism, at the beginning of the live stream, the famous Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, he's a personal friend of mine, has also written a lot about Eastern mysticism and its connection to the Hasidic mystical schools. Yeah, there's been work done on the relationship between Eastern mysticism and Hasidic mysticism. There was a book published by Harold Hafez, I think Hafner something was his name, called Zen and Hasidism, and I think there was an essay or two from Martin Buber in there. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of the boobs. Rose Lotus Mystic, Chief Seattle, thanks, Joe Campbell. Yeah, Joseph Campbell is the man. Joseph Campbell got me into a lot of mysticism. It's all his fault. If anyone hates Seekers of Unity, go and blame Joseph Campbell. There are meditations, Kevin Nicholas writes, there are meditations at the schools that came from Kabbalah. This is what the Torah means when it says that Abraham had other sons and daughters and sent them away with various gifts. So Kevin Nicholas is quoting the Zohar here. Which parsha? It slips my mind. Where Abraham gives gifts, and they go Kedma, and then it says Vitina is Kol Shaloi. He gives all that he has to Isaac, and the Zohar tries to reconcile those verses with this theory that Abraham sent gifts to the east. It's definitely an interesting and oft quoted piece of Zoharic literature. It smacks a little of Jewish triumphalism. Like, if anyone has mysticism, it has to come from us. We have to be the ones who started it. Which I think mysticism is in the human. It's there in the brain. It's there in the core of our souls and beings. But each to their own. Wow, I'm gonna get smacked for that one. Hull Tuberman, thank you for answering my questions, Zevi. A lot of people really judge Foss as some kind of weirdo. Glad to see you get him. Yeah. Firstly, there's nothing wrong with being a weirdo. Like, the mystics, many of them were really weird in the best way possible. But what comes out of their weirdness is love and kindness and compassion and intimacy and wisdom. So this is the point which William James makes, which is fantastic. William James, one of the founding fathers of American philosophy, pragmatism, American psychology, really wrote the textbooks of those fields. A student of Charles Sanders Peirce, an intellectual giant and genius par excellence. He wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, which should be mandatory reading for anyone and everyone. And over there, he writes that the mystics, even if they're crazy and even if they're off their rockers, which some of them are, let's be real, he says that if we watch their behavior and their actions, and he's a pragmatist, so this is what he's saying, they are, he calls them the vanguards of human morality and society, where they lead us in their example of how to love and how to be and how to live and how to cherish the moments of reality and how to cherish the people in our lives. And that point is so true. And I think George Fox, besides for being a great thinker and a great mythologist and metaphysician and all those things, he's someone who emanates and exudes love and kindness and wisdom and compassion and equality. And I think that flows directly from him into contemporary Quakers friends. Baruch says, what is love? What is love? I wish I knew. Love. What's that line? I think it's from Coldplay. Something. Life something and love is the prize. Life is tough and love is the prize. Love. Wow, it sounds so presumptuous and sounds so like to begin any sentence with love is. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something which is unorthodox. I'm going to Google a quote, which I love about love. And maybe it's from a Jew. His name was Saul of Tarsus, and he wrote like this. Let's find it. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interest. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoings, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. I hope no one crucifies me for quoting the New Testament on as a Hasidic Jew. Excuse the pun, but I think Paul said it very nicely. Where were we? Did we get that quote? Should I reread that? I'm gonna reread that quote. So I wasn't really paying attention because I was too busy reading it. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated nor rude. It does not seek its own interests. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. That's yeah, I think he said it really nicely. Where did my chat disappear to? Okay. Madam Buba was a great guy. My professor often quotes him and Abraham Heschel. Yeah. Avram Yeshua Heschel, who was a contemporary and interlocutor with Buber, an amazing spirit, an amazing thinker, poet, writer. One of really the first people that I read outside of the narrow tradition that I was raised in, who really turned me on to many wonderful things. And I recommend reading Heschel. I recommend reading Buber. I feel like reading Heschel will open your heart, and reading Buber will open your mind. And then once you've done that, they'll both swim into one another. Joseph Campbell is great. Hull, I agree with you 100%. Kevin Nicholas says, you're still missing the point. It's not about who's a Jew or non-Jew. These truths transcend those labels. Abraham was not called a Jew. He was an astrologer and a mystic who had a revelation. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Perhaps I was too quick to react, and I was sort of I was thinking about Abraham through the lenses of Jewish history. But he's referred to as, his name literally Abraham, which is my literal middle name, means Av Hamon Goyim. He's the father of many nations. He's the father of many great people, and from his loins comes Judaism, comes Christianity, comes Islam, and all the beauty that contains. Yeah, he's our main man. He's the father. Kevin Nicholas says he then passed that knowledge onto his children and descendants. Absolutely. That's a quote from Paul of Tarsus from Corinthians. That is correct. Look who knows their Bible. Paul was also a Jew. Correctamundo. Okay, back then to the questions that we had here from last week. When someone asks if you believe in God, do you give a one-word answer, or are you compelled to explain your position more fully? I gave up trying to explain my views and was stumped last time I was asked. That's a question from KPLLC. I generally, I mean, I think it changes over time. I think that I like to begin with saying yes. When people ask me if I believe in God, I like to say yes and follow that up with a but. And the but is, it may not be the God as you know God to be, which generally most people conceptualize some sort of patriarchal, monarchical, transcendent other entity, object who controls the world from the outside. And saying yes opens up to the possibility of then playing with people's expectations and challenge them to think differently about the concept, which is probably very dear to them. Saying no, which would be an answer which is also valid in mysticism, because God is also the nothing, the no thing, the ayin, the shunyata, is also a valid question as far as mysticism, a valid answer as far as mysticism goes. But I feel like most people, when they hear no, just assume you're all-out atheist, and then you don't have a chance to mess with what they think that word means, and really open it up and explore that question with them. And it's a question of a lifetime. So that's generally how I try to answer this question these days. Amin Rahman says, I'm a big fan of your work. Thank you so much. That's very kind. I'm so happy that there are more seekers out there who are interested in the same thing. I have a few questions. And there's 3 questions here. Number 1, if you had to pick one mystic from history that you could interview on your channel, who would it be? I think I answered something similar to this earlier in the live stream. My initial thought was like maybe someone like Plotinus or Shankara or Ibn Arabi or Eckhart. I know this is one, right? But I think I'd have to say, not that I would be in any position to interview this person. I'd have to pick my own mentor, guru, Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Even though it's a person which most people may not know, it's the person who it's the one mystic, and he truly was a mystic, as much as he was a general and a CEO and a father and everything else. He was a mystic through and through, and his vision for reality was one which is entirely inspired by mysticism, by Jewish mysticism, and he not only saw a direct path to a messianic, redeemed reality and a redeemed life, but acted on it. He went ahead and he really became a general and a warrior for that vision, for that cause. And it's his spirit which guides me most in my life and in my mysticism and in my spirituality. And it's his work which I live with, and which I encounter, and which I delve in, and which I question, and which I struggle with on a daily basis. So it's a meaningful answer for me. I don't know if it is for you, so I apologize. Number 2, you will be traveling onto a remote island. This is like I will be. This is like this is happening, and you can only take 3 books. What would you take? Whew, I have such a hard time with this question and questions like these. My immediate thought is just to take the books that I'm reading right now because I'm really in the thick of them and I want to finish them. Um, I'm reading The Pursuit of the Millennia by Norman Cohn is a fantastic book. I'm reading a book on Jung. I'm reading a book on Freud. I'm reading a book on Colin Wilson and and R.D. Laing. Those are all separate books. They're not one book. If they were one book, but I don't know. I mean, maybe if I'm going for, I'm there. How long am I on this island for? I'm there for forever. If I'm there forever, you want to take a book that you can spend a lifetime on. And from any tradition, the Zohar, the Upanishads, the Cloud of Unknowing, the Interior Castle, the verses of the Middle Way from Mahayana Buddhism, from Nagarjuna, or like something like the Bezels of Wisdom or the Tao Te Ching, like basically take any of the texts from any one tradition, because that's a text that you can spend a lifetime with and explore it and explore yourself and explore God simultaneously. Maybe I would take my own traditions because that's the language of my own soul. Okay. Lastly, the last question was, what stops us from experiencing unity? This is a really epic question, a really, really epic question. And maybe when we get to the end of, let's see how many more questions we have to go. We still got a whole bunch more. Cool. Luckily, I canceled everything for the evening, so I could give this time to answering questions and to being here with you guys. What stops us from experiencing unity? I think so. At a very like basic level, this is almost like a tautological answer. It's so simple. Is our sense of separate selfness? It's the sense that we have that we're not unified, that we're other, that we're something separate than reality all around us. That conception itself, that self-conception, stops us from experiencing unity. That I think goes without saying. I think the real question is what causes and what contributes to that sense of separate selfness, which is often blamed on the ego. The ego, I think, gets beaten up way too much in contemporary mystical literature. I think that the real mature mystics had an understanding that there was the ego, and the ego needed to be worked with and needed to be rectified, needed to be killed and resurrected, however it's referred to, and that the ego fundamentally was actually divine in a profound way. But generally, in an unrectified sense or in an undead sense, the ego is that sense of separate selfness, and that's what keeps us from experiencing unity. What causes that to arise? What causes that sense of separateness to arise? So there's like metaphysical answers that we can get into. We can talk about like Lurianic Kabbalah, and we can talk about Tzimtzum, and we can talk about theories of like Maya in Hinduism that all answer that question from like a metaphysical standpoint. To speak more psychologically and personally, which I think is how the question was being asked, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think the answer is because we don't really want it, or we're not really willing to make the sacrifices that it demands upon us to experience it. I think that there's a certain easiness and comfortableness in being trapped in this sort of lower ego space, in an unrectified space, in a separate space, where we see the promised land, we see the light on the horizon, but getting up and making that journey to the internal promised land, to the interior castle, to the kingdom within, takes real work, and that work is difficult and is hard, and it means facing ourselves, and it means facing our shadows, and it means making sacrifices that the ego doesn't want to make. And I think if we really wanted it, we could do it in an instant. And doing it in an instant means it's an instant which has to be reworked and redone and reinvested all the time. Okay. Let's have a look at we have some more things in the live chat. Awesome. Shmuel says, are you familiar with the Russian religious philosophy of the 19th century? Yes. Which was a lot about all unity, God, manhood, ethics, and Christian mystical thinking. Yes, I am. I am familiar with these Russian mystical thinkers. Not well enough. I'm in the middle of reading Shestov, who is also in that group. I believe Lev Shestov, I think, is rightly included there. He wrote a book called Athens and Jerusalem. their thinking is super mystical. And what's really cool as well is, besides for looking at the flavors of mysticism in different religious traditions, is also looking at the different flavors of mysticism across different nationalities. So you could talk about Spanish mysticism, and that would include both Jewish, Muslim, Christians. You could talk about German mysticism, that would include both Hasidic Ashkenaz and Eckhart and Tuller and Suso and Hegel, and sort of you can look at sort of there's also a, without being too German or essentialistic about this, there's a spirit that these countries possess, and we can sort of attribute that to sociological and historical causes if we don't want to be too spooky about it. And something in the Russian mind, in the Russian spirit, in the Russian Geist, that is really rich and powerful, that expresses itself in the great Russian novelists, in Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn, and in that group, and the Russian mystics, the Russian philosophical mystics are also really epic. I have to say, I haven't really dug in enough to read their works just yet, but I would like to. And another point to mention is that they're deeply influenced, obviously, by Russian Orthodox Christianity, which from its inception, the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church has been deeply mystical all the way back to Gregory of Palmas, Gregory of Nyssa, and George of Palmas. I hope I didn't mess up those names. Yeah, so it's a super rich tradition, which with a very strong emphasis on the human becoming divine, the human apotheosis or henosis. And yeah, I want to get more into them. Thank you for bringing them up. Blah blah says, my crypto Jewish family is from Jamaica and Cuba, and are described descendants of the Portuguese Jews. Pardon the typo. That's really wild. How do they get from Portugal to Jamaica and Cuba? You have such a fascinating and rich, like, family history. I feel very, very white and Ashkenazi compared to you. Definitely jealous. Rose Lotus Mystic says, yep, yes, no. You got that non-dual, dual language, non-language. Yaakov Harris says, what is your opinion on Yeshua, otherwise known as Jesus? I assume you don't believe he is God in the way Christians do, but do you believe he is a Messiah? So interestingly worded question, Yaakov Harris. Subtly worded, sensitively worded. I appreciate that. One of my favorite quotes from William Blake is that Jesus is God, and so are you, and so are you. And I think that's, and this is something which I've discussed on the channel before, perhaps more in veiled ways, to not upset too many people, but or maybe the Blake quote is, Jesus is the Son of God, and so are you, and so are you. However it goes. But the point is that I think that, and this is a point which is already, it's non-controversial, this is already a point which is well attested to and accepted by the academic study of early Christianity in the New Testament, even if it hasn't yet made it mainstream, that that there's a big difference between the teachings of Jesus and the teachings about Jesus by Paul and by the later followers of Jesus, where the teaching of Jesus, not on every point, but on many points, is very, very much in line with Jewish thought, Jewish practice, Jewish mysticism, and I mean, what Jesus, there are points which we have to be more specific and differentiate where things do begin to change and don't, and that's a complex field for itself. The basic message of Jesus is that the kingdom of heaven is within. If we can get rid of our egos and our desires for money and get real and get kind and get loving, then we can encounter the divine within ourselves and within everything else that exists, because we are all the children of God. So yeah, I mean, it's the message of the Jewish prophets throughout all the ages. I mean, you read Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Hezekiah, like they're all saying the same thing pretty much, and it's a beautiful message. I think the problem with early Christian theology, what happens is that instead of the message being Jesus coming and saying, "Hey, everyone is God. We all have access. We all have, part of the divine." The message became, it's like, no. we're not divine. We're lowly, sinful, wretched creatures. You're God. You're the divine. And if we can believe in you, then then and I honestly think that Jesus would have been turning in his grave from hearing such a thing. I know I shouldn't be talking about Jesus and Christianity because it's very contentious and Jews shouldn't be talking about it, but um, Jesus was a Jew, so maybe I can talk about it. But the point is that that the message of the mystics throughout history is a very pure, consistent, simple, and loving one about the divinity within each of us. And unfortunately, sometimes historically, their message, because it's a difficult and radical and challenging message, and one which mandates a real sacrifice on our behalf to really be kind to the stranger in a way which sees them not as other but as ourselves, it's easier to just put that load and just to divinize one person and to ignore our own divinity. And I think that's the real original sin of Christianity, to be a bit tongue in cheek. Wow, this is all being recorded and online, and I should be a lot more careful with what I'm saying, but there you go, I said it. Do I believe he is a Messiah? Um, so, complex question, complexly worded. Um, Messiah, in its original biblical context, just means someone who is anointed by oil. Mashuach Bashem, and it's a term which appears 49 times in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. Not once is it referred to the Messiahs that we use the term today. Messiah, the way that the term is used today, is not used that way, is as someone who is the Redeemer, what's referred to as the Goel in as amongst other terms, in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Tanakh, modeled on the character of Moses and King David, particularly who lead the Jews from exile to redemption, and that the belief that there will be a Messiah that will come at the end of days who will do that again. And the Messianic idea is a very rich and complex one and has been explored a lot and changed a lot and played with a lot by the Jewish mystical tradition, um, in an incredible way. And do I believe he is a Messiah? Is he a redeemer? It's an interesting way to frame the question. I think even within classic Jewish theology, the role that both Jesus and Muhammad play, and this is an idea which goes back to Maimonides, is part of the redemptive process, is part of moving the world towards a monotheistic, ethical, lawful, loving reality, which then Maimonides writes can be finally achieved by the Messiah. Listen, if someone plays a salvific role for you in your life, if someone comes and redeems you from the pits of your own despair and destitute or addiction or whatever someone's going through, they are a Messiah for you in your life. And I have no doubt that for many people, Jesus has been a Messiah, someone who has brought love and light into their life. Unfortunately, as well, historically, Jesus has been a character who has been, I think, very much co-opted and usurped and hijacked in the name of a lot of hatred and a lot of bloodshed and a lot of pain and agony, particularly to my own people, in a direct and immediate sense. I mean, all of humanity, my people, but I mean the Jewish people, my immediate family, and I think for that reason, it's very hard for Jews to. It's very hard to speak about Jesus in an open and honest way because of how much trauma has been caused in his name, and that's a historical tragedy. And I can't imagine anything more that would have pained Jesus to have innocent blood shed in his name. Maybe that's enough of an answer before I get into too much trouble. Um, yeah, but certainly I don't see him as I'm not a Christian. I don't hold any propositions of Christian theology, and so I don't see him as part of a triune Godhead or someone who was born of a virgin or the Messiah or any of that sense. I don't prescribe to any of that theologically. And by the way, if you read the Christian mystics themselves, they themselves don't talk about Jesus in the way that Jesus is spoken about in classic Orthodox. When I say Orthodox, I don't mean the Eastern Church. I mean mainstream Christian thinking. They they talk about like the same thing, which I think I'm saying right now. Can everyone hear me, by the way? I feel like I'm whispering a little. If someone says I can hear you, that would be really great. Or else I'm just talking into the void. Lev Shestov is also an existentialist. Yeah, there's a strong mix of existentialism and mysticism in these Russian thinkers, and also there's a strong overlap between existentialism and mysticism in general. I think Colin Wilson is in the heart. Someone like Jean-Paul Sartre writes about his own mystical experiences and how they factored into his philosophy. Who really sees existence, and therefore is a question which I think many of the mystics themselves asked, and I think that mysticism, Colin Wilson sees mysticism as the exit to existentialism, playing on Sartre's play No Exit. Yeah, fascinating subject, which we can come back to if there are more questions. Are there historical examples of Jews pursuing mystical path independent of the Kabbalistic tradition and or practicing Kabbalah without teachers? Yeah, so that's a great question. Firstly, we have to define Kabbalah to answer that question a little. Has anyone said they can hear me? Oh, great. Perfect. People can hear me. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. We have to define Kabbalah a bit more accurately to answer that question. Kabbalah, as it's used traditionally and it's used academically, refers to different things and covers different things historically. The traditional description covers a broader range of Jewish history. The academic definition of Kabbalah really begins when the motifs of Kabbalah emerge in Provence and southern France and northern Spain, which would mean that certainly there were Jews for many hundreds of years, 1,000 years, that practiced Jewish mysticism before Kabbalah came to be consolidated as it is known. And as well, outside of Kabbalah, there are mystical traditions. Firstly, there are mystical traditions following Kabbalah. The Hasidic tradition is something which is a child of Kabbalah but independent from Kabbalah, in the way that children are of but independent from their parents. But besides for all of those things which you probably know already, there are a bunch of traditions which are outside of the Kabbalistic tradition in some sense, and they've been basically subsumed under an interesting label which is called Hasidim. This is Hasidut or Hasidism before 18th century Eastern European Baal Shem Tov Hasidism. This is the Hasidism of the Second Temple period of Hasidei Ashkenaz, a very important mystical tradition in Jewish history. The German pietists, as they're known academically, perhaps even the Essenes and the Therapeuti and other groups around the area, all the way down to the present. There's also a form of Neoplatonic, which is practiced independent to and academically before Kabbalah. Jordan for the great question. Jordan says, also recently discovered your page through Let's Talk Religion. Looking forward to found it. I'm glad. I'm very thankful to Philip for featuring us and for collaborating with us and for allowing people to find us through him. And I look forward to hearing back your feedback on our videos. Justin Burkholdt says, reminds me of a William James quote. A genuine first-hand religious experience is bound to be a heterodoxy to its witness, the prophet appearing as a mere lonely madman. Let me read that one more time. A genuine first-hand religious experience is bound to be a heterodoxy to its witness. That the raw first-hand religious experience will appear as heterodoxical, as a non-orthodox, and the prophet will appear as a mere lonely madman. it's interesting because Plotinus describes mysticism as the flight of the alone to the alone. And the Talmud describes the prophets as Meshuggahim, as madmen. This idea that there's a heterodoxy which is fresh and raw and challenging, which then gets subsumed and petrified and stultified in orthodoxy, which then has to be broken again, is a theme which occurs again and again in religious history, particularly in Western religious history. Even though the topic of LDAF says, or LDAFO, even though the topic of Jesus is contentious, it's really refreshing to hear your other open opinions and ideas. Really appreciate your intellectual honesty. Thank you, man or woman, or both or neither. I appreciate that you appreciate the intellectual honesty. I think, I think we have to be honest. I think we have to be intellectually honest. I think, listen, there's so much like craziness and so much like people that are not willing to like think for themselves and share honest answers. I think like even though the internet is a totally crazy place, if you want to carve out like an oasis of community and of good thinking and of honesty and integrity, we have to be honest, and we have to be intellectually honest, and we have to admit when we make mistakes, and we have to be critical of ourselves. Yeah, so I appreciate that you appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Yaakov Harris says, beautiful, thank you. Beautiful answer. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your work. Thank you so much. I'm glad you appreciate it, and thank you for that beautiful feedback. Y'all can hear me. That's very helpful. Where are we up to? Normative Christianity, atonement, mystical Christianity. Yeah, 1 minute. Nice. Well put. Very cool. Yeah. I mean, this is really what I was referring to earlier, which Rose Lotus Mystic is pointing out, which is that you have as the charisma and the diadache. The diadache literally means the things that I was mentioning before, all those good classic mystical, which is where things go. I hate to talk. Jason says, "I hear with my ears and my heart." Thank you, Jason. There's a Jewish expression, "Dvarim hayetzim min halev nichnasim al halev," words that come from the heart enter the heart. So I appreciate that. Jordan says, "Thank you for the answer, brother. Much love. Much love back to you." Okay. In the questions from last week, we had a question from Anima Mundi, who said, "Hi Zevi, congratulations." Questions I would love for you to address are number one, how can one integrate the Jewish biblical and rabbinic tradition that has a God that wishes to be in relationship with the idea of non-duality? That's a great question. And number two is, if all is one, what is the purpose of praying for healing and success, etc.? Maybe I'll post the question that I'm about to answer down here in the chat, so whoever's here watching can see the question that I'm answering. And that is from Anima Mundi. How can one integrate the Jewish biblical and rabbinic tradition that has a God that wishes to be in relation with the idea of non-duality? So it's a tricky thing. In general, reconciling and marrying the biblical and rabbinic tradition with the mystical tradition which follows from it is a tricky and complex art, I would say. Madan Buba, who's a philosopher who was mentioned previously in this live chat, is someone who, in his theology, particularly in his work Ein Thou, very much militated against non-duality in Jewish thought for this particular reason, because he initially had been more mystically inclined, as evident in his earlier work Daniel, where he writes about his mystical experiences with a piece of rock, a piece of pottery that he finds on the floor. He becomes one with it. Buber later in his philosophy moves to what's known now as his dialogical phase, where he sees more important than unity is dialogue, is relationship, and he writes very persuasively and poetically about this. I don't know if I entirely agree with Madan Buber, not that I'm anyone to disagree with him, a man of great stature and genius, but I think that it's possible to have a relationship with and within oneself. And it's possible even to love oneself, as controversial as that may sound philosophically. Um, and I think a lot of the Jewish mystical tradition, which is what this question is about, is particularly there to answer this question. And a lot of the Lurianic notion of the Tzimtzum is how God creates the perception of otherness within God's self so that God can have a relationship with God's self. And I think that notion is where we philosophically, or metaphysically at least, theologically, solve that issue of reconciling relationality and non-duality. In Luria's idea of Tzimtzum, where the self can create an illusion of self-othering so that it can be in relationship with itself, and essentially we are that part of God that does not know it's God, that can come to love itself and therefore love God. Uh, as we say in Hebrew, al regel achat, on one foot. That is how I'd say. That's a technical, metaphysical answer. I think it's a personal question too, and I think people that grew up with a biblical and more precisely rabbinic theology, and then encounter stronger ideas of non-duality, really grapple with that question. I certainly did, and I think an answer which has been shared to me by many teachers, Jewish, Sufi, and other, is that there isn't necessarily always one correct perception of God, as much as some people like to hold on to like an idea that there's a truth in mystics. They go through different challenges, and sometimes in life we do need an image of God, and important to remember that it's only an image that can be loving and can be relational and it can be even parental, or can be whatever it is, monarchical even, and it's okay to engage with that mask of recognized as a mask, to borrow a term from Joseph Campbell. And there are also moments in life when we embrace other notions of divinity and non-dual. It's important to remember as well that non-duality is also just another name, just another label, just another mask of God, and none of them grasp the essence. One of my favorite lines in the Zohar is Leis machshava tfisa bei klal aval nitwas ihu berusud liba, that no thought, no label, no category, no mask really grasps God. The only thing that really grasps God is that which is infinite, which is the heart. And so therefore, as long as we know that to be the truth, we're open emotionally, psychologically, personally, spiritually to engage with different facets and different images of God. So that's a technical metaphysical answer and a psychological answer. Question number 2 was, and let me post it again in the group for everyone who's here to see. Anima Mundi wrote, if all is one, what is the purpose of praying for healing, success, etc.? So I'm going to come back to the live chat after I answer this question. So whoever's posted questions there, don't worry, I'll be back in a second. Prayer can be broken up into different genres. And what's being described here by Anima Mundi, praying for healing, for success, is what's known as petitionary prayer. It's prayer coming from a place of deficiency, that there's something that we want that God can provide to us, and if we only beseech and pray for God enough, then we can have that. And this form of prayer is a form of prayer which many mystics throughout the ages found very troubling. There's this classic mystical literature in my own tradition, in the Chabad tradition. There's extensive work that's been written, particularly by the Tzemach Tzedek, about how we can ask God, which is that in addition to petitionary prayer, there are also other forms, but there's, and which is about expressing gratitude and worship and love. There's this prayer when one is simply struck in the middle of the day by the awe and beauty and grandeur of whatever it is that they encounter. It can be a rose, it can be a plastic cup, and they're forced to their knees out of humility and gratitude, and that's a moment of unity of prayer. There's a quote from Bishop Shelby Spung. Bishop Shelby Spung. Shelby Spung? Shelby Spung. He says that and I think he's quoting an earlier Christian mystic. He says that I realized I was God one day when I was praying, and realized that I was talking to myself. And the way that many mystics conceptualize prayer, which is challenging for them to conceptualize petitionarily, is prayer as an act of union, prayer as an act of introspection, lehit palel, to gaze into oneself in the original Hebrew. So I hope that answers your question, Anma Mundi. Let's have a look at the live chat, because it is alive. Blah blah says the crypto Jewish family in the Caribbean only came to the Caribbean from England after Portugal. Wow, that is fascinating. I mean, the journeys that people took and the lands that it took them through, the countries and cultures, that's really, really epic. You should definitely be proud of your history, and you should explore it. Adam says, Shalom. Hey, Adam. Good to see you again. Many Gentiles as well as Jews who weren't brought up religiously find the seemingly pedantic focus on the minutiae in Orthodox halacha off-putting and difficult to accept, even though we all seem to enjoy its fruits in Jewish comedy like Curb and Seinfeld, etc. How would you explain the spiritual on the globality and the universality of this? But I think the unique is so important. And what is unique here is that, and this is something which, if you want to get a bit more of a full exposition of this, I had a conversation on another fantastic mysticism philosophy channel called Beware How, where I kind of broke this idea down, I think, over the course of half an hour. But the basic premise is that that Judaism, Jewish mysticism, as much as it had room for a transcendent Godhead, deity, divinity, God as Ein Sof, God as infinite and beyond, transcendent entirely, an idea which goes all the way back to Philo of Alexandria and others. There's also a very, very important notion in Kabbalah of the immanence of God, the presence of God in reality, in the everyday, in the here and now, in this world that we know. A term for anyone that knows a bit of Jewish theology, which is referred to originally as Shekhinah, as the feminine aspect of God, which is indwelling in reality. In some senses, we are the Shekhinah. The world is the Shekhinah. There's different ways that's framed Kabbalistically. And because there's this dual relationship, with this gendered relationship between the masculine transcendent and the Shekhinah, the feminine immanent, but by the way, there's a book theology from Abelson, written back in the 80s. Check it out. Because we have this dual relationship of this interplay and erotic intimacy between the transcendence and immanence, it's specifically in the moments of immanentization that the transcendence of God is realized. Catch that? Which means that it's not in the moments of escape and ecstasy, as important as they are, that God is realized and manifest in reality, but it's in taking the mundane and taking the everyday and sanctifying it and deifying it in the minutia of halacha, in the minutia of Jewish law, which is so ingrained. If someone doesn't know halachic Orthodox Judaism, they do not understand the degree which, as I've said in the interview, it's so obnoxious to quote myself, that from the moment one takes the first breath as a human, from the moment one wakes up on the first day to the moment one retires on the very last day, and every day in between, there is something halachic. There is something halachic to be doing, and the Kabbalists, in a show of genius, were able to perfectly mend and blend the metaphysics and mysticism of Judaism into the halachic minutia of the everyday, and in doing so, they believed that they were acting as the Shekhinah in its erotic embrace with Kudsha B'richa, with God the masculine. That the mitzvahs that they were doing were constituting, were building the body, the Evarim de Malka, the limbs of the queen, so that it could come and be reunited with God the masculine. They were constituting the corpus of Israel, the body of the Shekhinah, so that it could be reunited with Kudsha B'richa, with the divine masculine, the transcendence. Psychologically, that means that they were engaging in the practice of erotically reuniting the world, of the immanent to transcend and the transcendent to immanentize. And this is just one of many metaphors that the Kabbalists use, and we can go on, and they do the way that they talk about the bodies, they talk about the relationship between the Sefirot. This happens, and this is the same thing. The Kabbalists think and speak laterally, where they repeat these messages in 1,000 different ways, but that's just one register, one map of that relationship. Let me plug in my laptop so it doesn't die midstream, and we will continue. Okay. Hal Truman says, if you can't quote yourself, who can you quote? Touche. I'm gonna have to quote myself, quoting myself as I quoted myself. There's a great line from Walter Coffey's book, Faith of a Heretic, where he writes about the obnoxiousness of authors who quote themselves, and then goes on to like quote a full paragraph of himself. It's very, very funny. He's a very funny author.